श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रम् धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवम् यतीन्द्रप्रवणम् वन्दे रम्यजामातरम् मुनिम् लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भाम् नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम् वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यम् अच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणम् प्रपद्ये लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्टजीवजीवातवे नमः।
Asmad-Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad-Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad-Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So I offer respects to all my teachers, and today we're starting a new book called Tattva Trayam. Tattva means principle, and Trayam means three. So there are three principles. Actually, the study of in Vishishtadvaita, the study of everything is according to different principles. So there are three principles that we understand in study. One is Tattva, one is Hita, one is Purushartha. So we understand the truth, the nature of everything. Then Hita means a means to liberation, and Purushartha means the goal. Okay? But these are not the three principles that Tattva Traya is about. Tattva Traya is about the three principles of Tattva, or the three Tattvas. And the three Tattvas are, in Sanskrit, Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. So Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Chit means consciousness. It means the individual soul. It means the living beings. Achit means those things which are not sentient. So the universe or material nature, insentient things, matter. And Ishvara means the controller or the creator or the supporter of all of the other two. Two of them are dependent, one of them is independent. So Chit and Achit, the souls and the universe, are dependent on God, and God is the creator, supporter, controller of all of the rest. So these are the three sections of the book. First section is about Chit, about the soul. Second section is about material nature and matter. The third section is about God. And why does Pilolokacharya, who is the author of the book, and of course Manavala Mahamuni has given a commentary on this book. So why has Pilolokacharya picked this as one of his 18 Rahasya Granthas, or 18 works on esoteric subjects? Why has he picked this? He has picked this because this is basically a primer of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. So instead of going to the Sri Bhashya immediately, instead of going immediately to or even to the Bhagavad Gita, he's just given a simple book where he describes these three principles in maybe not in full depth, but in an introduction. Let's say it's an introduction to these three principles. So I have three English versions of this book, three English translations. One was done by some person called Parthasarathy Iyengar, and actually it was sent. Copies of it was sent in 1893 to Chicago, to the Parliament of the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, which is a famous meeting of a lot of different people from different religions. More famously amongst Indians, it was a time when Swami Vivekananda came and spoke in America. So people know it for that. But in fact, in those days, there was a lot of interest in America and in the West, maybe in Europe also, about Indian religions. And so I was unaware at this until I came across this translation that this was an attempt by Vishishtadvaitins to speak about Ramanuja's philosophy in America. So we can probably chalk this up to the first time that people in America were exposed to, let alone Ramanuja's philosophy, Tengalai Sri Vaishnavism. southern school of Sri Vaishnavism, which is represented, of course, by Pila Lokacharya and Manavala Vamana. So it's interesting. Now, why didn't somebody why didn't the Sri Vaishnava actually go to Chicago to present this to people? Probably in 1893. Even today, it's very hard to get some very orthodox people to leave India because there are so many rules of ashram, so many social rules that they feel like they become polluted if they leave the Bharatavarsha, the home country. But of course, there are today many Orthodox Sri Vaishnavas, not many, but some who will leave, and the rest of them use Zoom or they use a telephone to. So they're all using computers and telephones and things like that in order to preach in foreign countries. Okay, so enough about that. But I just thought it was interesting that this particular version of Tattva Trayam was preached in America, in Chicago, in 1893. So that's the reason we're not going to read that particular version is because, again, 1893, the English will be quite archaic, and it'll probably take us. I might as well read it in Sanskrit. Let's put it that way. It's pretty archaic English, so we'll leave that alone. We've had some classes before where we've gone through the Old English, the 1910 and 1915 English of Alkondavili Govindacharya, and that was hard enough. So if we go back to 1893, it may be even harder. So there are a couple of other English versions of this book, Tattva Trayam. One by Satyamurti Iyengar of Gwalior. So Gwalior is sort of in the middle of India, Madhya Pradesh. So he's living a little bit north of most of the Sri Vaishnavas that are in South India. And he's a pretty famous author who has put a lot of things. I think there's a book on Sandhya Vandana, which I've given to everybody, which he translated. And he's a pretty modern author. Of course, he's not alive today, but in the 60s, let's say, he was still living. So that's we'll have a look at that. And what he's actually done is we'll get into it, but he's translated a short commentary by a person called P.B. Anangacharya of Kanchipuram. So there was one Acharya, very famous scholar, P.B. Anangacharya, and I think we have, in our discussions on Mumukshapadi, which we were also studying about the secret mantras that are given at the time of initiation or samashranam or panchasamskara, prapati, by Sri Vaishnava gurus to their students. In the Mumukshapadi, there's also a commentary by this P.B. Anangacharya. So he's very famous. He's given commentaries on a lot of things. In fact, if you look on the internet at dravidaved.org, if you look at that, you will find which is the site that has all the 4,000 hymns, Tamil hymns of the Alwars. You'll find each verse of the Alwars has got an elaborate commentary in Tamil by this P.B. Anangacharya. So he's a great scholar, and again, not living today, but perhaps of the last century or a little bit before. And and he made a very short commentary also on this Tattva Trayam. So that short commentary on Tattva Trayam by P.B. Anangacharya was translated into English, and so we'll have a look at that. And then there's another, the main text that we'll be looking at is an English and Hindi translation. For those of you who know a little Hindi, we're not going to go into the Hindi. Okay, so we're just going to look at the English. An English translation by some scholars, Indian scholars, of Tattva Trayam. Right, so now Tattva Trayam, again, like all the Rahasya Granthas, it seems like it may be, I'm not sure if it's pure Sanskrit or Manipravala. Manipravala is a mixture of Sanskrit and Tamil. More or less, it's Sanskrit words with Tamil endings. Just as we in English, we sometimes use Sanskrit words like guru and karma and yoga. Okay, so similarly, to make the knowledge available to the non-Sanskrit knowing Tamil public, in the community of Sri Vaishnavas, the scholars would sometimes write in this hybrid language of Mani Prabala. And again, for those of you who don't know what Mani Prabala it means, literally means pearls and coral. So Mani means pearls and Prabala means coral. And so why pearls and coral? Because there's a type of jewelry that's worn by ladies in South India. They wear this necklace, which is very nice. It's a pearl and a coral, like that. And they wear a necklace with alternate pearls and corals in the necklace. And so it's red and white, and it's very nice, And of course, it has some astrological meaning also. The coral is supposed to, be Rajaguna and increase the passion, and the pearl is supposed to help control the mind. So there are these different reasons why people wear pearls and corals. But it's very beautiful because it's not just all pearls, it's not just all coral. It looks very nice. So the idea is that this hybrid language of Sanskrit and Tamil, being a little bit of Sanskrit, a little bit of Tamil mixed, like that, it's considered to be a hybrid language, or it's very charming, I guess, to people who know Sanskrit and Tamil. So that's why it's called Mani Prabala, and it's a medieval language which is almost exclusively used by Sri Vaishnavas, medieval Sri Vaishnava acharyas or teachers. Okay, so that's the medium. Of course, we're going to look at the English version, so that shouldn't worry us too much. Now, before we start, we've been doing some other books by Pillai Lokacharya. We're still doing Mumukshapadi. So I thought it would be normally we just start with Asmat Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Guru Bhyo Namaha. But there are in fact a couple of taniyans or pranam or respect obeisance mantras that or prayers to the different teachers, which are normally chanted before we start any lesson or any book on Pillai Lokacharya and Manavala Bhamani. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing because otherwise, we'd be here forever with all the different traditional taniyans or pranam mantras. But let's have a look at. I just wrote out a couple of them. One for Manavala Bhamani and one for Pillai Lokacharya. So let's have a look at that. So these are this on the screen. We see this. This is the Roman or the these are in Sanskrit, so we won't worry about any Tamil versions because, of course, in Sri Vaishnavism, there's always a Sanskrit version. There's always also a Tamil version, So, but here we have this. These are the two main prayers that people. The first one is for is always chanted first. Usually, this is for Manavala Mamuni, and the second one for Pillai Lokacharya. As you can see by the first word, it says Lokacharya. So I'll just say them and then we'll get into the text. So, Sri Shailesha Daya Patram, Vibhaktyari Gurandavam, Yatindram Paramam Vande, Ramyajamata Munim, Lokacharyaya Guruve, Krishna Parasya Sunave, Samsara Bhogi Sandasta, Jiva Jiva Tave Namaha. Okay, so, and we won't go into the meanings exactly right now, but I just thought we'd introduce those. And now let's have a look at the text, Tattva Trayam, and we've got a few introductions. We'll look at the introductions and the prologues and things like that. So I don't know how far we'll get to the actual text itself today. If you have to leave at any time, you can. It's all being recorded. It'll all be on YouTube. So this is the main text. This is the version of the main text, the Tattva Trayam by Lokacharya. So, of course, he's called Pillai Lokacharya. Lokacharya, Acharya means teacher. Loka means this world, so universal or world teacher. It's more like a title, but that's his name. As you saw from his pranam mantra, his name is Krishna. So then we have Tattva Traya. I already explained what that meant. There are three principles in this world, three principles. Everything can be divided up into either being a sentient being, like the souls or the atmas, or an insentient being like the matter, or it can also be a form of God. You know? So we have these three principles. A treatise on Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta. Okay, so English and Hindi translation. And Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, if we were to translate Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, Veda means knowledge, Anta means end. So it means the end of all knowledge. It also means the end of the Vedas. The end part of the Vedas is the Upanishads, and therefore the philosophical section of the Vedas. So the Vedanta is a school of philosophy, and there are several different flavors. Think of Vedanta as ice cream, and there are different flavors. There's chocolate, vanilla, there's raspberry. So people have their own favorite flavors of Vedanta, different interpretations of the Upanishads. So Vishishta Dvaita is one of those flavors, one of those different types, which was taught by the Sri Vaishnavacharyas, especially Ramanuja. There are other forms of Vedanta even prevalent today. Most notably, there are three main flavors, right? So these are, I guess you can say, the Neapolitan of the Vedantic ice cream. So they are the chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. So they're basically the Advaita, the non-dualist system of Vedanta, preached by Adi Shankaracharya. The Dvaita school, preached by Madhvacharya, the dualist school. So we have non-dualist, dualist. Non-dualist is also sometimes called monist, right? The dualist school. And then we have the dualist come non-dualist, right? The mixture, like that. And there are many other schools which are different types of mixtures, but Vishishta Advaita is a type of mixture. It is Vishishta Advaita. It's Advaita. It's a non-dual idea, but Vishishta or Vishesha means specific or special, right? A specific type of non-dualism. So some things are considered non-dual, and some things are considered dualistic, like that. And it refers to the relationship in Vedanta between these three entities being Chit, Achit, and Ishvara, the souls, the universe or matter, and God. So, okay, this is just a table of contents. So let's have a look at the preface. Okay, so he says here in the foreword, the text of Tattva Trayam was not available for a long time, though it is one of the good primers for the knowledge of Vishishta Dvaita philosophy. Another way to describe Vishishta Dvaita philosophy would be, let's say, holistic Vedanta, holistic knowledge of the knowledge from the Upanishads, holistic, because it deals with the analogy that Ramanuja gives in the Sri Bhashya and throughout the works of Vaishnavacharyas. We get this analogy of Sharira Shariri Bhava, which is that the souls and the world are like the body of God. So if we think of the whole of creation, the whole of everything, the whole of the universe, which includes God, as being like a body, the souls and matter are like the body, and the atmas and matter are like the body. The universe is like the body, and God is like the soul of that body. And the analogy is given like that because the soul is the thing which maintains the body. When the soul leaves the body at the time of death, the body decays. So as long as there's a soul inhabiting the body is maintained. So the soul actually supports and controls the body and pervades the body with consciousness. The consciousness pervades the body, and the soul is consciousness, and the consciousness pervades the body. You don't pervade any other person's body, right? You only feel what is happening to your body. And so the soul is the principle that maintains and controls and supports the body. So similarly, God is the principle which pervades and controls the universe and the souls. So he's saying here that Tattva Trayam was not available outside of its original language, Manipavala or Sanskrit, for a long time. So he's saying here he's mentioning the authors here, Dr. B.M. Awashti and Dr. Mrs. C.K. Datta. These are the people who have done this translation. Right? These are the scholars. So have done a good service to the students of religio-philosophical system by bringing out a translated and adequately annotated edition of Tattva Trayam. So we can say Tattva Trayam. The tendency in South India is to add an M to the end of things. In Sanskrit, that would put it in the accusative singular case, but so it's when it's the object of a sentence, we would add the M. So here they just said Tattva Trayam. As the text is concerned with the enumeration of the basic elements of Vishishtadvaita philosophy, rarely entering into a deep philosophical analysis and polemics. So it's supposedly a simple treatise, right? The learned translators could not get an opportunity of showing their philosophical understanding at its best. This is considered a simple book, but it goes to the credit of these two scholars that they've tried to present as faithfully as possible the meaning and purport of the text and the philosophy it seeks to propound. Philosophical scholarship in India is at a crossroads. Our scholars who receive their education in universities are by and large, attracted to philosophy as it has grown out in the West. So this is a common lament in India that people say, oh, the educational system was changed by the British when they ruled India, and therefore now we don't study any of our own or we look people are taught in India to look with disdain on some of the homegrown philosophies and homegrown subjects, and they're given a more Western education. So this is a typical thing that people sometimes lament. They whether it's true or not, I mean, if you want to study the ancient texts, you can, but he's just saying this. They develop a tendency to look at the philosophy developed in India with contempt. Okay, this is their idea. In fact, the actual fact is, if you look at the history, that there were scholars, there were German and English scholars from outside India who did look at India and look at Sanskrit literature and philosophy of Hinduism and Vaishnavism too, and they did look at it with contempt. And there were other people who did not, other people who embraced it and said, no, this is very interesting. This is very deep, the philosophy that we're finding in India. So we have the people who are the Indiophiles, and you have the Indiophobes also. You have the people who love Indian philosophy. They love everything coming out of ancient India. And then we have the other people who are afraid of it or don't like it so much, or who try to impose outside religious philosophies like Christianity onto the Indians. So okay, that's just history. So anyway, that's here and there. We don't care about that. The reason for this is twofold. Okay, so he's going to give some reasons here. First, these scholars have little knowledge of Sanskrit, and there are no good philosophical translations of all texts available either in English or in Indian languages. So at the time when this was written, actually there were a couple of translations, which we'll see, but at the same time, they were not widely spread. So, and this is the thing: if we don't know Sanskrit, if we don't know Tamil or Old Tamil, or Manipavala, then it's very difficult to, of course, get an entrance to some of these subjects. So-called translations of old texts are done by Orientalists who have translated letters rather than the spirit of the ancient philosophy. So there are people who give you literal translations of the Vedic hymns, or even of any sort of book by the ancient acharyas, but since they haven't really studied under a Vaishnava, they're just giving translations without any understanding of the meaning of the translations. A very simple example of this would be when the Western scholars came to the Vedas and they saw that the first prayer in the Veda, in the Rig Veda, is Agnimi Ile Purohitam Yagyasya Deva Mritajam. So the first word is Agni. So when they come to the word Agni, they say, oh, what does Agni mean? Agni means fire. So here we have a bunch of people, they're reading the scripture, and the scripture starts off with a prayer to fire. So then the Westerners think, oh, these people are very backward people, very primitive people. They pray to the elements like fire, so they think somehow God is in fire, fire. So they're pantheistic people, who see God in the elements like that. So So that's one level of understanding that the prayer is to fire. So the Indologists would think, oh, look at this, these people are less intelligent, they're praying to fire. There's also another level, a deeper level, is that there are different devatas, or there are different beings who are chosen by God to look after these different aspects of the material world, like fire, like rain, like the sun, like all these different things. And so there's a god or a demigod, let's say, behind that fire. So that's another level. So the man may be praying to the element fire, he may be praying to the demigod fire. But there's even a deeper level than that, where the Vaishnavas look and they see that the fire that is being spoken about here, the element within the element fire, just like within everything, because the Lord is all pervading. The definition of God is all pervading, is everywhere. This is one definition. So therefore, God is there within fire, just as God is within everything. So we are addressing God within the fire, or the element of fire, or the fiery element. The power for fire comes from God, like that. So this is a third, more esoteric understanding of this word Agni. In fact, we'll see, for instance, if you read the Ishopanishad, which is a very famous Upanishad, the very first of the 108 Upanishads, the last text of Ishopanishad is Agnenaya Supitaraya Svan Vishvani Deva Vaivani Vidvan, etc. And also starts out with this word Agne, which is the vocative singular case of Agni, which means oh fire. So you can think superficially it's a prayer to fire. Oh fire, oh fire. So why would you pray to fire, right? Oh fire. Or you could think a little deeper, and you could think it's a prayer to the demigod of fire, right? The personality behind fire in this material world. Or you could think even more deeply, and you could understand the translation of that to mean, O supreme person, O God, O supreme Lord, who is powerful like fire, who gives the power to fire. That is the more esoteric understanding. So when Indologists came, they gave all sorts of translations, but they didn't understand the essence. They didn't understand the esoteric meanings of some of these scriptures. So number one, he's saying, first of all, nobody knows Sanskrit. But even if they do know Sanskrit, right, they come at it with the wrong mentality. They have not understood the inner meaning of some of these texts. So these are a couple of reasons why people did not understand these texts after a while. And so normally the way to understand any of these texts is in Guru Parampara. Parampara, the word Parampara means one after another. Guru means teacher. So teacher to student, the knowledge is passed down. And the esoteric understanding of these texts is passed down. Whereas if you're just an Indologist, or if you just know Sanskrit and you go and you try and attack these texts and translate them, you're going to come out with a very stilted and very it might have a literal translation. You might have a good literal translation, but you don't capture the spirit of the book. So-called translations of all texts are done by Orientalists who have translated letters, so they can translate the letters and the words, but rather they haven't caught the spirit of the ancient philosophy. So today what we're trying to do is we're trying to catch the spirit also, not necessarily just give a literal translation. As a result, these translations are obscure, unintelligible to the modern mind, and present dull reading, right? Who wants to read about a fire, about a person praying to a fire? But if you understand the deeper meaning, it becomes more interesting to the student of philosophy. So the student of philosophy, if he is not approaching philosophy as part of his Orientalist discipline, right? If you're actually interested in philosophy and you're not just studying it to get some degree in a university, can derive any benefit and interest in philosophy by reading these translations, right? So he cannot derive really any real benefit or interest from reading these types of translations. So we're trying to read a translation which gives us more of the spirit of the text. Secondly, whatever of Indian philosophy is taught in our universities is done through such books as modeled on Madhava's Sarvadarshan Sangraha. Okay, so there's another book, right? It's also translated into English, right? there was a person called Madhavananda, not to be confused with Madhva. Madhva Acharya was again the founder of the dualist system of Vedanta, who lived in Udupi in southern Karnataka, and there he's also a Vaishnava. This person Madhava, although he has a name of Lord Vishnu, which is Madhava, Madhavananda or Madhava, was an Advaitin, a follower of Adi Shankaracharya. He was a Mayavadi, in other words, a non-dualist or monist, right? And he wrote a book called Sarva Darshan Sangraha. So Sarva means all. Darshan means darshan actually means to see. It means looking at. So we can say views. So darshan, when we use the word darshan in Sanskrit, it also means a school of philosophy. If I say Vishishtadvaita is a darshan, or Nyaya, logic, is a darshan, these are different schools of philosophy. So a school of philosophy in Sanskrit is called a darshana. It's a way of looking at the world. So the word darshan, strictly speaking, literally means looking. So it means a way of looking at the world, a way of presenting the world. So sarva darshan means all the different views. Sangraha. Sangraha means brought together, collected. So his book was called All the Different Views of Philosophy Brought Together. So what he did was, for the first time, instead of just propounding his own ideas or following his teacher's ideas, he got all the ideas of all the different schools that were known at the time, or philosophy had known at his time, and he put them in a book, and he criticized them from the point of view of his own, which was the Advaita philosophy of Shankaracharya. So you can read that book also. It's a very interesting book. But this is a model type book for what happens today. What happens today is that people go into a university and they study comparative religions or comparative philosophies, and they study different philosophies, and they look and they compare them, and they decide what are the pluses and minuses, what are the good things and bad things of each philosophy, like that. So this is so he's saying that in the universities, the Indians are taught like that today. They're taught in a way to compare all these different philosophies. These are regarded standard reference books, first, because no other book have been written, and secondly, because the authors have been important men in the public administration. The chief defect of these books has been their treatment of Indian philosophy, not from the point of view of the development of concepts and ideas, but from the point of view of schools. Again, schools or darshanas or different viewpoints on philosophy. They have assumed as if the Nyaya philosophy, Nyaya means logic or inference. They have assumed as if the Nyaya philosophy, and Nyaya is not just logic, of course, is adopted by many schools, but as a method of analyzing different viewpoints. But there is a specific school. In fact, there's two specific schools of logic in India. One is called Nyaya, is the original form of logic, the original Nyaya Darshana, the Nyaya school. And then there's another one called Navya Nyaya, which is an update on that. Navya means new logic. So you have these two different types of Nyaya. So they have assumed that if the Nyaya philosophy has developed in isolation from the rest of the philosophical movement and so on. So what he's saying is that these ideas, the idea of these books like Sarva Darshan and Sangraha, is that these different schools grew up in isolation from each other, but in fact they didn't. Everything grew up together, and so we need to look at the history and the reality of how these schools came about, these different schools of philosophy. Treating philosophical development in India as leading to the Advaita Vedanta after Sarva Darshan Sangraha has also become another major factor in making Indian philosophy unpopular. Okay, so what he's saying basically here is that it became unpopular to study these other schools because basically Sarva Darshan Sangraha was written by an Advaitin, monist, a non-dualist, and therefore he looked at everything as being, all these other schools as being dismissed by his favorite school of philosophy, which was Advaita Vedanta, and therefore Therefore, some people, they look at the whole scheme of things of all these different schools and they say, well, Advaita is the most popular. It's the one which most people write about, most people study. So let's just forget about all the rest and let's just study Advaita. And out of the three flavors, remember I was describing Vedanta, the Vedanta schools as having different flavors. Out of the three main, there are other flavors, but out of the three main flavors, the three main flavors are, of course, Advaita. In order of popularity in terms of followers of these philosophical schools today, Advaita's probably got the most adherents. Then Vishishta Advaita, and then Dvaita, in that order. So, which is neither here nor there as to how many people follow a philosophical school. Has nothing to do with whether it's a correct school, a correct philosophy or not. But in any case, we would expect that if the school had many faults in it, that not a lot of people would be following it. So here we have this discussion. So thus, the modern student trained in the Western philosophical tradition finds the Indian philosophy of the kind taught in our universities, much that he is conditioned to regard as unphilosophical. So he finds, he's just complaining about the system of education in India, basically. An Orientalist student who receives his training in Sanskrit, on the other hand, lacking the conceptual tools required for philosophical pursuit, is incapable of appreciating and evaluating what is philosophically significant in our tradition. Therefore, our present-day educational system cannot produce Indian philosophers, right? So this is the thing that if you look, and this is still being lamented today, if you look in universities and around the world, you'll find scholars in Christianity, and the scholars in Christianity are also practitioners of Christianity. You'll find scholars in Judaism or scholars in Islam, and they're always Jews and Muslims, right, practicing. When it comes to Hinduism, you'll find people who are complete atheists teaching Hinduism, right? What to speak of Vaishnavism in universities. So it's a very strange thing that we find that somehow or other we feel still today that a scholar who has no real relationship to the philosophical school that he's teaching can somehow best teach the school, right? So this is not correct. The traditional method is that we should learn a philosophical school from a person who is deeply involved in that philosophical school and can best give us a true understanding of the meaning of that philosophical school. Therefore, it might be difficult to find some of these philosophical schools have gone defunct. They've practically become extinct. We don't find many adherents to some of these small philosophical schools anymore. But Vishishta Advaita is a huge school with a great society and culture, and same thing with Dvaita, same thing with Advaita. So there are certainly people that we can learn from, rather than going to academic scholars who are just trying to tell us about some extinct form of religion. So therefore, our present-day educational system cannot produce Indian philosophers, in quotes, who would be expected to carry forward the indigenous philosophical system. In other words, most of the philosophers of India today do philosophy, right? But it's just their job. They're not actually involved in it themselves. Outside an Indian cultural milieu, right, which is an indispensable factor for philosophical growth. These Indian philosophers who have taken pride in specializing in Western philosophy, those Indian philosophers who have taken pride in specializing in Western philosophy, have at least one serious disadvantage and one special advantage. Their disadvantage is that they are not brought up in the Western tradition, and their concepts I think that's supposed to be in crores, not cores, but crores. Okay, the word crore is used here. Here we're entering into English, or where people are mixing Hindi words and English words. The word crore means 10 million. It means 10 million. So sometimes in India, if you want to say somebody's a millionaire, you call them a crorepati, a person who has 10 million. So crore, in crores, are still non-Western. So the disadvantage is that because people in India who are studying Western philosophies, right, are not brought up in a real Western tradition, although we have to say today, pretty much if you're brought up in India, it's very similar to being brought up in the West. Everything is Westernized now. Um, uh, and so, but what he's saying is the disadvantage of Indian scholars studying Western philosophies is that they're not really brought up with Westerners, so they have slightly different understanding. They cannot therefore be acknowledged as interpreters of the Western tradition, which task philosophy seeks to perform. But they have an advantage. They have that philosophical tool which they can apply to any given matter. If the tradition of Indian philosophical thinking is correctly presented to them, they can, with the philosophical tool available to them, do a required philosophical analysis. Okay, so he says the one advantage of homegrown Indian scholars looking at even Western philosophies is that they tend to analyze things in the way that people in India analyze things. And you'll see if you study any philosophy in India or any school of thought in India, you'll see how they methodically analyze everything and divide it up into different things. Just as we have Pillai Lokacharya here, he's divided up his subject matter into three in the very title of the work, Tattva Trayam. There are three subjects that are going to be studied in this book. So, however, must be acknowledged that sometimes Western tools may become inadequate or ineffective when applied to Indian philosophy, but such occasions are rare, and vigilant philosopher can, through insight, discover an Indian method of analysis and may modify his Western tools to suit Indian conditions. But all this can happen only when the philosophical tradition is correctly presented to him. For this, he has either to rely on Orientalists of high caliber, saturated in the tradition, or he himself has to get traditional training. So this is what he's saying. He's saying we should try to do that. We should try to. If you really want to study these subjects correctly, you have to become saturated in the tradition, right? Meaning you follow the tradition or surround yourself with people who are saturated with the tradition, or you have to get specifically traditional training under a traditional teacher or guru who is giving us the meanings of these scriptures in a traditional way. The present edition of Tattva Trayam aims at correctly presenting the philosophical tradition, and in the introduction, an attempt is also made to present a rudimentary conceptual analysis. Right. Such an attempt is laudable because I feel it is a right step towards doing Indian philosophy, really actually understanding it. This has been made possible because of the cooperation of a traditional Sanskrit scholar, Dr. Awashti, and a modern philosopher, Dr. Mrs. Datta. So we have these two people cooperating to present this book. So such cooperative ventures alone can reestablish the living philosophical tradition of India, and this is the person who wrote the foreword, R.C. Pandya. So now we have a preface, and preface is going to start talking about the text itself, the Tattva Trayam of Lokacharya. So, by the way, Lokacharya, I explained, means the world guru or Jagat Guru. Sometimes people say the guru of the universe. It's an honorific title which is given to a person that he's the Jagat Guru, he's the greatest guru, he's the guru of all the world, like that. So because Pillai Lokacharya was such a great acharya, he was given this title, Lokacharya. And Pillai, the word Pillai in Tamil means son. So he was just like, his guru considered him just like a son, or maybe he was his son. So therefore he's called Pillai Lokacharya. We have also, there was in his lineage also, in his Guru Parampara, there's also another person called Nam Pillai, right? Nam Pillai. And Nam Pillai means our son. So there was another guru who had a favorite student who called that student my son. So he became known as son. So like that. So this person, Pillai Lokacharya, was also named after that person. in his Guru Parampara. His father was one of the students that came down in the lineage from Nampillai. If anybody knows the actual names of all the people in the Guru Parampara, which we won't go into here, it will take too long. But he was therefore given that name by his father because of their Guru Parampara. So the Tattva Traya of Pillai Lokacharya or Lokacharya is an exposition of the three fundamental principles, Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. We already went over what that means. After the system of Ramanujacharya was propounded in his Sri Bhashya. So this is, of course, being written later on in history, that Ramanuja is not the first Acharya, but he is a great Acharya upon which he has written the seminal or the basic texts that are commented on by most of the later Acharyas. So prior to this, Ramanuja had written 9 books. So he had written 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras. He had written a commentary, a book on the meaning of the Upanishads, right? So his three commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras are Vedanta. In the order of complexity, they are Vedanta Sara, which is a condensed and simpler version. Vedanta Sara, Vedanta Deepa, which is more elaborate, and Sri Bhashya. Sri Bhashya, which is the most elaborate, is magnum opus on the Vedanta Sutras. Then he wrote Vedartha Sangraha, and this is not the chronological order that he wrote them in, but I'm just explaining it in one way. Vedartha Sangraha, which was a book on the meaning of the Upanishads, but not taking any one Upanishad and fully explaining it, but giving the general understanding of how to understand the Upanishads. So these 3 books, so Vedanta Sara, Vedanta Deepa, Sri Bhashya, Vedartha Sangraha, and then a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita called Gita Bhashya, just called Ramanuja's Gita Bhashya. Bhashya means commentary, a big commentary. We have other commentaries that are smaller or subsidiary commentaries that sometimes people come afterwards and they give commentaries on the commentary of their greatest Acharya, and they want to just tweak little parts of the commentary of the Acharyas or explain in detail philosophical points that were given in general by the Acharya, by their Acharya, and they want to go into more detail in those things. So they write other commentaries, smaller commentaries called Tikas or Tippanis. A Tika is a commentary on a Bhashya. A Tippani is a commentary on a Tika. It's a very small commentary. So there are other commentaries out there. There's a whole system of doing commentaries like that. Won't get into it. Okay, so Ramanuja propounded basically the main ideas of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta or holistic dualism, holistic non-dualism, let's say, right? In his Sri Bhashya, the well-known commentary on Vedanta Sutras of Badarayana. Badarayana, as we mentioned before, is normally when we talk of the author of the Vedanta Sutras, we talk about Badarayana. Badarayana is just another, most people accept Badarayana as being the same person as Veda Vyasa. So Vyasa, the word Vyasa means compiler, Veda means knowledge, or specifically it means the Shruti that was heard by or meditated on, realized by the great sages. It's the eternal Veda, the eternal undisputed original scriptures of India, like that. So Badarayana, also known as Veda Vyasa, sometimes known as Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, when he writes Puranas and things. Vyasa means compiler, and so the Vedanta Sutras were written by Badarayana. So the book comprises of clear and concise propositions expressing the views about 3 fundamental principles. Though a small book, it has a distinctive completeness in itself. Polemics abound in the book, showing the distinction between the Vishishtadvaita tenets and those of other systems such as Advaita Vedanta, Sankhya, and Jainism. Right? So Jainism is a system of philosophy. Buddhism, there are different systems of Buddhism and different systems of Jainism. So Jainism today has Svetambara, Digambara. The Buddhists, the original 4 original forms of Buddhism, we have Shotrantika, Madhyamaka, etc. And so then we have different forms of Advaita. So basically, what he's going to do is he's going to point out some of these other schools and what they believe and why he believes something different. So those references some references to the text are given in the footnotes, wherever necessary for its elucidation and proper understanding, for those of you who haven't studied all these other schools. We have tried to follow the original faithfully with the hope that it will be of use to those who are interested in understanding the system of thought of Ramanuja and its later developments carried on by his followers. In spite of our best care, faults might have crept in inadvertently, and we shall be glad to accept the responsibility and rectify the same if our attention is drawn to them. This is just typical in a preface or forward that the authors are just being humble here. We wish to express our gratitude to Dr. R.C. Pandya, who we just read his forward, right? Professor and head of the Department of Buddhist Studies, the University of Delhi. Okay, so they got this scholar who is the head of the Department of Buddhism to write their forward, who has very kindly gone through the manuscript, given valuable suggestions, written a forward to the book. Besides, our grateful thanks are to Dr. S.R. Bhatt, reader in philosophy, University of Delhi, for writing an essay on the Vishishtadvaita philosophy. We also thank Indu Prakashan for the publication and an unprinting press for printing the book, and signed the authors, B.M. Ashwati and C.K. Tattva. Okay, so now a little bit about the Vishishtadvaita philosophy. The Vishishtadvaita philosophy, the Tattva Trayam of Pila Lokacharya, is a short but lucid and popular manual of the Tengalai branch of the Vishishtadvaita school of Vedanta. Okay, so Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, and in fact, there's not only a Vaishnava version of Vishishtadvaita, but there is indeed a Shaiva version. There are people who are Shaivites who follow a type of Vishishtadvaita. So we can't say that Vishishtadvaita is only Vaishnava, but there is mainly, when you talk about in India, the followers of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, that form of Vedanta, you're talking about Sri Vaishnavas or people who follow Ramanuja, or people who are actually Vaishnavas and not Shaivites. So amongst the Sri Vaishnavas, there are two major groups today. There are many minor groups, okay? So we're not talking about there only being two major groups, but basically, if you meet a Sri Vaishnava, it's going to be divided up into two groups, which is the Southern School and the Northern School. By the Southern School, we mean the Acharyas who have come from Sri Rangam, which is in southern Tamil Nadu, or actually central Tamil Nadu. And then northern Tamil Nadu, there's a place called Kanchipuram, where the Acharyas from the Northern School come from. So that's the only reason it's called Northern and Southern School. Some modern scholars try to say, the Northern Acharyas are more obsessed with Sanskrit, the Southern Acharyas are more obsessed with the Southern language Tamil. But that's not true. All Sri Vaishnavas study the Sanskrit works. They also study the Tamil works. It's not true at all. But there are slight differences between the Northern School and the Southern School. And these are traditionally 18 differences, which we've gone through, I think, in another class. But we can also discuss them at a certain point if anybody's interested. We can go through those differences that are there between the Southern and the Northern School. But this is the Southern School, the Sri Rangamacharyas, and they were more or less led by Pillai Lokacharya, and the commentaries are all given by Manavala Mahamuni. Right. So anyway, the Tengalai branch of the Southern School, the Vishishtadvaita School of Vedanta, purporting to present a philosophical, theological exposition of the basic tenets of the school as they developed in post-Ramanuja period under the influence of the teachings of the Pancharatra school and the Alwar saints. Okay, so what is Sri Vaishnavism? Sri Vaishnavism is a combination of a few things. It's first of all, it's Vedanta. It's an understanding, an interpretation of the philosophy of the Upanishads, which is the basic scriptures of Hindus or Indians. On top of that, we have the school of Pancharatra, which is a separate school of philosophy, which is a practical school of how to worship God in temples and in different rituals. And there are different schools there are different agamas. Pancharatra is an agama. The word agama means tantra. Tantra means a method of worship. Agama means also a method of worship, like that. So there are these different samhitas or books of the Pancharatra which describe the philosophy of Pancharatra. So the philosophy of Pancharatra and the whole Pancharatra school is subsumed by the Sri Vaishnavas as part of their own. Although initially, in time immemorial, it would have been a separate school. But since the principles of Pancharatra exactly match with the Vishishtadvaita Vedanta philosophy of Ramanuja, it's accepted. It's accepted as a big part of Sri Vaishnavism today. So also we have the philosophical writings of the Alvars, who are great Tamil saints and who have given us 4,000 verses, called the Nalayira Divya Prabandham. The Nalayira. So Ayira in Tamil means 1,000. Nala means 4. So Nalayira means 4,000. Divya means divine in Sanskrit. And Prabandha just refers to those texts, to those verses. So the 4,000 divine verses in Tamil of the Alvar saints. Sometimes Sri Vaishnavism is also called Ubhaya Vedanta. So the word Ubhaya, just a little bit of technical jargon here so people can understand if I use these terms. Ubhaya in Sanskrit means both sides or two sides. In the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna speaks to Arjuna, he says to Arjuna says to Krishna, by the way, who's driving the chariot, he says, "You take me in between the two sides. Senayor ubayor madhye," he says in Bhagavad Gita. Senayor means in between the two. Madhye means in the middle. Senayor of the armies, right? The senas or the combatants, right? Ubaya Madhye. Ubayo means on both sides. So I see them on both sides. So take me in. This is where the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, in between two sides. So similarly here we have this idea of two things running parallel. Like you can imagine, the analogy would be like a train track. So anyway, we have this. We have these three influences: the Sanskrit Vedanta, the Tamil Vedanta. So as I was saying, there's this idea in, sometimes you'll see this Ubhaya Vedanta is mentioned in Sri Vaishnavism. It means that there's the Sanskrit Vedanta of the Vedanta Sutras and the Upanishads and the Gita, the basic texts, what we call Prasthana Trayi, the three texts. And then we have the Tamil Vedanta of the 4,000 divine hymns of the Alvars. And these are compared with each other like that. And they're like twin train tracks on which the Sri Vaishnava train can move. This other idea of the Pancharatra school is also included there like that. So although it appears to be three things, it's all merged into one in Sri Vaishnava society, all these three influences. So Sri Vaishnava scholars will be sometimes given the honorific appellation, the honorific name of Ubhaya Vedantins. We are the Vedantins of the Ubhaya, of the Tamil Veda and the Sanskrit Veda. Okay, so ever since the dawn of thought, the Indian mind is distinguished for its spiritualistic metaphysical reflections, the culmination of which is regarded to have reached in the Vedanta system. Okay, so in India, there were six main schools of philosophy or darshanas, right, which are called the Sad darshanas in Sanskrit. Sad means six. So when somebody says to you Sad darshanas, it means there are these six great schools of Indian philosophy. And these six schools are also called Astika, which means based on the Vedas. So we have the Vedas, right, the original Vedas, the ancient texts, and from them came these six schools. So these schools are Yoga, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva, and Uttara Mimamsa. So Purva Mimamsa means the Kama Kanda, Uttara Mimamsa means the Vedanta. So we won't go into what all these schools mean right now. If we want to go and understand a little bit about what they are, sometime again we can talk about it. But we're discussing basically here Vedanta, right? So the Vedanta school there were disputations, books back and forth, and scholars over millennium, and all of these schools basically were defeated by Vedanta. Vedanta became the prominent philosophical school of India, which of course accepts the Vedas. There are some schools that do not accept the Vedas, like Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Indian atheism. There's a school of Indian atheism called Charvaka. So there's these other schools. So we won't worry about the other schools. We won't worry about the other schools that reject the Vedas or the other schools that accept the Vedas. Basically, in India, the Vedantic school of based on the Vedas is the predominant one. Okay, so the system of Vedanta is contained in the Upanishads, right? The Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of the Mahabharata, which is an Itihasa or one of the two epics. Itihasas means Mahabharata or Ramayana. And the Brahma Sutras. The Brahma Sutras are also called Vedanta Sutras. Sutras are small aphorisms which have a lot of meaning in them and which have to be explained. They're very cryptic because they're small. So the system of Vedanta has contained in the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras, which three together are technically called Prasthana Traya. Sometimes people say Prasthana Trayi, but Traya means three, or Traya means three, and Prasthana means the basic texts. Basic texts of Indian philosophy are these three, right? Teaching the same truth respectively in mystical, moral, and metaphysical forms, constitute its foundation as well as supreme authority. Right. The Upanishads are the pioneer works of the Vedanta, since they seem to teach apparently contradictory doctrines. Right, a need was felt to attempt to systematize their teachings. As a result of which, the Brahma Sutras and the Gita came into existence. So the Vedanta Sutras or Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita tend to systematize the philosophy which is given here and there in the older Upanishads. And the Upanishads, so if we go through the Upanishads, if we just read the Upanishads, there'll be different philosophical points given in a hodgepodge sort of order. And so what was felt was needed was to put it in a proper logical order so that it could be studied, philosophy could be studied step by step, rather than all over the place, different doctrines, which is the way it's given in the Upanishads. So, but the ambiguity which prevailed in the Upanishads and which necessitated the composition of the Brahma Sutras and the Gita, right, was also found to prevail in the latter. Okay, so because the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras are very short aphorisms and very cryptic, there was some ambiguity in them as well as the ambiguity in the original text, the Upanishads. And in the Gita also, there are so many commentaries on the Gita, so you have all different schools of philosophy trying to interpret the Gita. So there's ambiguity in these texts, and that's why the acharyas give commentaries or purports to these texts in order for us to understand from a different points of view of different philosophical schools what these texts mean, because they can be interpreted in different ways. Consequently, all the subsequent Vedantic acharyas were obliged to write commentaries on the Prasthana Traya, especially on the Brahma Sutras, which was regarded as the most systematic exposition of Vedantic thought. Right. So, in fact, if you want to establish a particular school of philosophy or darshana, right, each darshana has to have now a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, and a commentary on the Upanishads. That's understood. The chief commentators, those whose works are known to us, are Shankara, and this would probably be I would say this is in chronological order pretty much. Adi Shankara, so Shankaracharya, Bhaskara, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, Vallabha, Srikanta, and Baladev. Srikanta is that one who was a Shaivite, who wrote Vishishtadvaita Shaiva commentary, right? Whereas we have Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, and Vallabha and Baladev, right, all being Vaishnavas, giving Vaishnava interpretation. Shankara and Bhaskara are somewhat, we can't say Bhaskara is an Advaitin, he's a Dvaitin. but or Beta, you can say. The word Dvaita means two, dualism. Advaita means monism, one. So Dvaita, dualism, non-dualism combined. Beta means difference. Abheda means non-difference. So it's just another way of saying Dvaita is another word for beta, and Abheda is another form of Advaita. So beta, we say either beta or Dvaita for Bhaskara. Bhaskara is the original propounder of beta. From him, there was another school of beta called Yadava, propounded by Yadava Prakash. And we have other forms of beta also today. Even Baladev is a form of beta, Achintya beta. We have the beta of Nimbarka, which is called Swabhavika beta. So Swabhavika beta means natural dualism and monism. So let me just go through. I'll just give you the names of their different philosophies. Shankara is Advaita, or non-dualism. Bhaskara is Dvaita, or beta. Dualism and non-dualism at the same time. Yadava Prakash was also had a type of beta, which is a little bit different from Bhaskara. He was at the original Gurukula, or school teacher of, or guru of Ramanuja. Ramanuja left him because he didn't agree with that philosophy. Ramanuja's philosophy is Vishishta Dvaita, which is holistic non-dualism. Here we have Nimbarka is the Swabhavika beta, which means natural difference and non-difference. Madhva is dualism, right? Complete dualism, like that. He believes in 5 different types of differences. So we're talking about the differences and non-differences between these 3 entities that we're going to be discussing: Chitta, Nishvara, right? So this is basically what we're talking about. So Madhva was a dualist, so he believed in dualism, right? And as I said, it's a Panchabheda is his philosophy. 5 different types of dualism, between 5 differences between the 3 things. We won't go into it here, but anyway, if anybody wants to know what those 5 differences are, we can talk about it. Balaba, who has got a philosophy called Shuddha Dvaita, which means purified non-dualism. So he accepted a form of non-dualism, as Ramanuja also did, a type of non-dualism, but not absolute non-dualism as Shankara. Shankara has this absolute. It's also sometimes Shankara is called Kevala Dvaita, or absolute non-dualism, right? So there's non-dualism and dualism in all these philosophies, except Shankara. Let's say Shankara and Madhva are the 2 extremes of extreme absolute non-dualism in the case of Shankara, and absolute dualism in the case of Madhva. So Vallabha, Shuddha Dvaita, purified non-dualism. Srikanta, again following Ramanuja, he took Ramanuja's philosophy of Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta and simply changed the name of God in that from Vishnu to Sriman Narayana to Shiva. So he is the Shaiva Dvaita. And then here we have Baladev. Baladev came later on, and then Baladev was in the 18th century. And he is a Gaudiya Acharya who wrote the commentaries on the Vastanatraya for the Gaudiya Sampradaya, Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, which has its headquarters in Vrindavan, in Uttar Pradesh, and in Bengal, West Bengal, and even East Bengal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and in Orissa, where the center is there in Puri Jagannath. So all these acharyas attempt to expound. Oh no, his philosophy is called Achintya beta. So it's also a type of beta. So Bhaskara and Yadava had a type of beta. Nimbarka had a type of beta, and Baladev also has a type of beta. But his beta is not the beta of Bhaskara or Yadava, or the Swabhavika beta of Nimbarka, but it is the Achintya beta. Achintya, the word Achintya in Sanskrit means inconceivable, difference and non-difference. Okay. So all of these acharyas attempted to expound the sutras in a coherent and systematic way, claiming to satisfy the triple tests of scriptural support. So every system should have scriptural support. What do we mean by scriptural support? It means support in the actual original Vedas, in the Upanishads, right? There are many scriptures, but the highest scriptures, according to Vedantists, right, the ones which cannot be contradicted, or what are called swata pramana, We use this word in epistemology, which is the study of the science of knowing reality, of knowing truth, right? Of what is real knowledge, right? So epistemology deals with pramanas. Pramanas are methods of obtaining true knowledge. So these are, here we're talking about the triple tests of knowing, of systematically knowing what is true knowledge. The scriptural support has to be there. So it has to be there. Philosophical support has to be given in the Vedas, because all these schools, owe allegiance to the Vedas. We're not talking about schools that don't owe allegiance to the Vedas, like Buddhism, etc., which we mentioned. So it has to be scriptural support from which means from the Upanishads themselves and the Brahma Sutras and the Gita. We call the Prasthana Trayam, the basic texts. And there has to be logic, like logicality or yukti. Yukti means logicality, and experiential certainty. This is another thing which Ramanuja insisted on, that philosophy shouldn't just be armchair philosophy. It shouldn't just be theoretical, but it should be practical also, right? If we come up with a philosophy which is not practical, which doesn't we can't live that, and there's no reality to it in the modern world, then it's just a armchair philosophy, or it's just a philosophy on paper. It's not experiential, right? So it has to have experiential certainty, which is anubhava. Anubhava means we have to be able to use it in our life, feel it, and use it. So starting with different philosophical standpoints, all of them interpret the sutras, meaning the Vedanta sutras, but also the other Prasthana Trayam, the Gita and the Upanishads, right? Each of them profess that he alone has arrived at the true and genuine meaning of the sutras. Okay, so as we said, we have the Upanishads, the Gita, and the Vedanta sutras, and they're cryptic, and they can be interpreted in different ways, and the different acharyas have given different schools of thought to interpret them in different ways, and each one of them says that he's got the way that the author intended. The author of the Upanishads, the author of the Gita, the author of the Vedanta sutras intended this to be this is the real meaning of these books, right? So each one professes that he's arrived at the true and genuine meaning of the sutras. That's obvious, and the disputants, there are disputants all the time between these different schools. People write books against each other. People have physical debates where they come together and they debate issues of their differences in philosophy, and that still even happens today. So amongst the commentators, Shankara's Advaita and Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita are the most popular and ingenious expositions, and this is accepted not only by Indian scholars but also by Western scholars who have studied the different schools. Ramanuja's and Shankara's are the most popular and the most ingenious expositions of the sutras and the Gita and the Upanishads, right? They're the two main schools. Sometimes people also include Madhva as a school, but Madhva school is definitely much less popular than Shankara and Ramanuja. So Shankara and Ramanuja schools, they're the most popular, right? Okay. If you look at the internet today, you might think it's the Gaudiya Vaishnava school which is the most popular, but historically that hasn't been true, and scholars know that that's not true. It's just that perhaps the modern Western followers of Gaudiya of Vedanta are much better at Facebook and much better at the modern technologies of spreading their school. So that's why you see a lot of that in the world, and through the spread of societies like ISKCON, etc., around the world. You'll see that, and you might think, "Oh, that's a very big school of thought," not that prominent school. But in India, it's not true. The Vishishtadvaita and the Advaita are much have a history of being greater schools in popularity. But anyway, as I said, popularity is not a standard by which we judge a philosophy to be correct or incorrect, right? So, among these commentators, Shankara's Advaita and Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita are the most popular and ingenious expositions. Shankara has evolved one of the most compact and finished systems of thought that has come out of the human brain. But Ramanuja's panentheistic interpretation of Vedanta, right, offers a bold and in no way less important contrast to the absolutistic position of Shankara. So Shankara's, as we said, Kevala Advaita means absolute non-dualism. Everything is one. right? That is Shankara's philosophy, basically. Whereas, so that's understanding absolutistic position. The word panentheistic needs a little bit of discussion. So panentheism, pan means all, en means in, and theism means philosophy of God or a spiritual philosophy. So the philosophy that understands that God is in everything, not to be confused with pantheism. There's a philosophy called pantheism where we see, the God is a stone, God is the tree, God is the mountain, God is the river, like that. We pray to the river, we pray to the tree, we pray to the rock, like that. God is in all those things. So we accept that everything is within God and God is within everything. He's all pervasive. We've discussed this all before in other classes. The word vyapaka in Sanskrit means all pervasive. And the Srimad Narayana, the philosophy of Ramanuja, explains from the scriptures that he got the most fundamental definition of God is that God pervades everything. He's all pervasive. And how does he pervade those things, everything? He pervades from both outside and inside. Okay, so we won't go into that because we've gone into it before. But anyway, this is the point that in English, if we want to use a term to describe Ramanuja's philosophy, we will call it a panentheistic philosophy. Now, it's not just Ramanuja's philosophy, of course. Some of these other Vaishnava philosophers have also understood that God is within everything. He's pervading everything, and even Shankara. So in a sense, panentheistic philosophy is there amongst the other acharyas or other teachers of Vedanta as well. But specifically, we people tend to call Ramanuja's philosophy a panentheistic, all in God, everything in God philosophy. So everything, the total of everything is God. Within God, everything is contained within him. At the same time, he is also within everything. He pervades everything from inside as well as outside. So there are differences of opinion amongst the scholars as to who is near the true spirit of the triple texts. Right? We have a translation of Sri Bhashya into English by a person called Thibault, a Western scholar called Thibault, and he was an Indologist, and he translated both Shankara's commentary and Ramanuja's commentary, the Shariraka Mimamsa or the Shariraka Bhashya of Shankara, and the Sri Bhashya of Ramanuja. And he compared them, and he said, from my point of view, I really have to say that Ramanuja's, to me, comes closer to the original text, the meaning of the original text, in my opinion. So that was his opinion, and that's pretty much the opinion of a lot of Western scholars. Although obviously there are many people who are of the opinion that Shankara's philosophy is greater than Ramanuja's. But anyway, in India, and of course the debate goes on in India, there are differences of opinion among scholars as to who is near the true spirit of the triple text, yet it remains indisputable that Ramanuja's system is equally significant, an equally significant expression of Vedantic thought. Okay, so that is not disputed. And that is not disputed. It's not disputed amongst Sri Vaishnavas that they have to study Shankara's philosophy. And it's not disputed by the Advaitins that they should study Ramanuja's philosophy, because they have the two schools have been at loggerheads for, let's say, millennia, since Ramanuja's time, right, which was 1,000 years ago. We just had the 1000th anniversary of Ramanuja's birth in 2017. So he was 1017 to 1137. So, and then Shankara's dates are less well known. So somewhere between the 7th century and the 9th century, Shankara. So so then we have the system of philosophy associated with the name of Ramanuja is known as Vishishtadvaita. And though this word does not occur in his works, right? It's very interesting that a lot of these Vedantic acharyas, they'll propound a particular type of commentary on the Prasthanatraya, but the actual name of the school is come up with by the later members of their lineage to describe the type of philosophy that they propounded, right? So Ramanuja never used this term, Vishishtadvaita. It's come up later on. Similarly, I think, I'm not sure whether Baladev spoke about it, Tintya Beta Beta, but anyhow, it's become the names of these different philosophies. So though this word does not occur in his works, yet it truly represents the central pantheistic or organicismic, if that's an English word, I don't know, I've never heard it, okay, seems like we're inventing some words here, organicismic idea of his system. What I tend to say is it means holistic Vedanta. He has, but Vishishta means specific. There are specific areas where things are dual, and there are specific areas where things are non-dual. That's the point of Ramanuja. He has not developed any new system of thought, nor does he claim originality. Okay, so this is an important thing, because if we look up here, back at the list of these different people, these different flavors of Vedanta that were taught by these different people, right? Shankara basically came up with his own philosophy. Bhaskara also. Nimbarka also. Madhva definitely came up with his own philosophy. Okay, Vallabha. Srikanta copied Ramanuja, but just slapped Shiva over the top of Narayana, right? Changing the name of the original deity, right? Baladev also came up with his own interpretation. You see, all of them, none of them credit people coming before them as propounding the same philosophy as them, right? Ramanuja, however, in his Srivasya, goes to great lengths to explain that his philosophy is not new. And in fact, anybody who has studied the Srivasya or any of the works of Ramanuja will know, or the life of Ramanuja, will understand that Ramanuja and one of his main disciple, Kuresha or Kuradalwan, they traveled to Kashmir to read a very, very rare commentary on the Vedanta by an ancient sage called Bodhayana. So anybody who knows anything about the ancient sages of India will know that there are these names like Bodhayana, Apastamba, people, and they have these, and they're very ancient authors who have. Bodhayana is the author of a Kalpa Sutra, a commentary on the original Vedas. So he's considered a very ancient sage. So there's a manuscript in Kashmir, in the Sharda Peetham temple, that Ramanuja went to consult the philosophy of the Vedanta, written a commentator, by a really ancient commentator at the time of Ramanuja. So Ramanuja never says that I made this philosophy up, unlike the others. The others don't say they made it up either, but they just say this is the. I look at this and I understand this to be the true meaning of the scriptures, right? What Ramanuja says is, not only do I understand this to be the true meaning of the scriptures, but I am following in the footsteps of ancient commentators who have explained it like this. So he mentions that. This is very important to understand, because the system in India, there's two systems of knowledge. One system is to make things up yourself, which is called ascending knowledge, where I decide through my brain power, through my logic, my interpretation, my understanding to explain something. And another way is to learn from a teacher, learn from a specific parampara. That is called a descending theory of knowledge, especially about transcendental things which we cannot measure empirically. We tend to want to go to the authority, and we learn from the authority, as was lamented in the foreword there, and even in part of this preface, right? That the modern Indian scholars are just simply, they're learning the Western method of knowledge, and they're not taking the traditional method of going to somebody who is immersed in the philosophical school, in the culture, and learning from that person. So Ramanuja took that other more traditional step of consulting the ancient authorities, and therefore he never said that he was, he never indicated that he was simply coming up with his own idea of the interpretation of the scriptures, but he was following other ancient commentators, and he mentions their names: Bodhayana, Dramida, Tanka, Ruhadev, Kapardi. These are the names that he mentions. Ramanuja mentions their names. like that. So many of their works are now not extant because they're such old commentators, but still Ramanuja mentions them. So whereas we don't find mention of any in these other flavors of Vedanta, we don't find the propounders, the original founders of these sects or schools, mentioning people who came before them as being their inspiration, but giving the comments by their acharyas being the inspiration for them. Of course, there are people in the lineages coming before these other acharyas, but these are sometimes considered to be seminal or founding acharyas, founding teachers of particular schools. So in some cases there's no one who comes before them, and in other cases like Baladev, of course, there's a history of acharyas who came before him. Anyway, we won't go into a history of all the different schools, but we could do that some other time. The schools of Vedanta, we could have a history lesson, but this is not about history. So, but it's just an important point that Ramanuja didn't come up with his method of philosophy. There is a difference of opinions among scholars as to who is near the true spirit of the triple texts, yet it remains indisputable that Ramanuja's system is equally significant expression of Vedantic thought. We did that. The system of Vishishtadvaita associated with Ramanuja is known as Vishishtadvaita, and we did that. Okay, so here we go. We're going to explain. So he accepts the authority of an ancient and weighty Vedantic tradition established by Vishishtadvaitic precursors or teachers that came before him, right, like Bodhayana, and as developed by his also Purvacharyas or previous teachers like Tanka, Dramita, Guhadev, Karpardin, and Baruchi. I didn't mention Baruchi before, but Baruchi is also there. Okay, so these are different Purvacharyas to Ramanuja, previous acharyas. His genius lies in the systematic and masterly presentation of Vishishtadvaita, and thereby controverting the Advaita at a highly needed time. Okay, so the idea is that Ramanuja is so great, and he eclipsed all of these previous teachers because he was so systematic in the way he presented the philosophy of the previous teachers. Not that he made up this philosophy himself. So he does so by emphasizing the spiritual experience, right? And it was also highly needed at the time. So sometimes we talk about Shankaracharya coming and giving Advaita at a time when Buddhism was rampant in India and chasing the Buddhists out of India, because Buddhism was born in India, but yet it left India and it was practically driven out of India. So in the same way, they talk about Ramanuja converting the people back to the real understanding of the Vedas after they had been slightly misled by a half-truth of Advaita by Shankaracharya, right? And Shankaracharya preached his method, his school, in order to get people to leave Buddhism, but to come back to the study of the Vedas, or to accept the Vedas. But Buddhism doesn't accept the Vedas. But sometimes people compare Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta of Shankara to be almost the same in a sense. Buddhism talks about nothingness. Advaita talks about oneness, right? Whereas Ramanuja talks about variety, talks about these three things as being real, like that. Whereas in Advaita Vedanta, these three things, the Tattva Traya, the Chit, Achit, and Ishvara, are not considered to be real things. They're considered to be only from the point of view of a person who is in ignorance, who is covered by ignorance, sees these three things as different things. When true knowledge is gained, according to Shankara, these three things become the same thing. They all become Brahman, they all become spiritual, and they're all homogeneously one thing. Right. That's basically Shankara's philosophy. Right. And there are reasons for it, but we'll go over that some other time. So here the point is that Ramanuja took it a step further. Shankara took the step of bringing people back to the Vedas from Buddhism, and Ramanuja brought them from the atheistic, almost atheistic type of philosophy of Shankara to a more theistic form of philosophy under Ramanuja. So that was highly needed at the time. He does so by emphasizing the spiritual experience without ignoring critical requirements of philosophy. right? So so that's also an important thing to remember, that he not only has the critical requirements of philosophy, but he also acknowledges the spiritual experience of persons. People have spiritual experience, they have revelation, and they have spiritual experience. He provides the grace of God. He provides the grace of God with a convincing philosophy, right? So he explains about the grace of God, explains about a personal God, and philosophy with a sublime love of God, right? The thing is with Advaita, although Advaitans talk about God, or they talk about different forms of God like that, ultimately their philosophy leads them to this oneness. This idea of oneness means that there cannot be any grace or there cannot be any love. There cannot be any real grace or any real mercy or any real love. Because in order to have love, you have to have two distinct entities. You have to have lovers. I love you, you love me, right? Without two personalities, there cannot be love, right? And love is a relationship. You can't have a relationship if you only have one living entity, one entity. If there's only one entity, there can't be love. So there can also not be grace. There cannot be mercy. One entity showers the other with mercy, gives the other mercy or grace, like that. So there has to be these two. The idea that there has to be at least two entities for these things to have any real meaning. Of course, the Advaitins talk about the meaning of love and grace and everything like that, but ultimately it's meaningless because their ultimate idea is of monism, of singularity, that there's only one thing. The way that Shankara gets around talking, where the Advaitins talk about God and they talk about love and they talk about grace and everything like that, is that they get around it by saying that in this state that we're in now of ignorance, covered by illusion, right? We see these differences, and therefore these differences appear to be real, like a dream. Like we see things in a dream, and that appears to be real, but it's not really real. When we wake up, we realize it's not real, like that. So they talk about two levels of understanding, two levels of experience. The level of experience when you're in illusion, and the level of experience when you're free from illusion. And they call these two levels in Advaita Vedanta, they call them Vyavaharika and Paramartika, right? Vyavaharika and Paramartika. I can give you an example. That would mean, like, for instance, we have this idea that we know that the world is a globe, is a round ball, like that. So we've seen pictures from space where there's a curvature of the earth, and people who go up in balloons or go up in aircraft, they can actually sometimes see the curvature of the earth, like that. So only when we go up to the highest levels, though, can we see that. Right now, when we're on the earth, we look out our window and we see the horizon, and we see everything looks flat to us. I mean, of course, there are mountains and there are valleys, but generally we see the world as being flat. And this led to the idea of the ancient people to think that the world was flat, right? We won't talk about people who are silly today, who continue to think that. But there was a time when everybody believed that the world was just a flat plane, like that. They had no idea that the earth was a globe. Okay, so those people in ancient times who were in illusion, they didn't understand that the world was a globe. They thought the world was flat. But if you take them up in a spaceship or an aircraft or a balloon or on a higher level, once they come to a higher level of understanding and they look out the window, they see the curvature of the earth, they realize it's a globe, like that. So that's one analogy to explain Shankara's idea. Shankara's idea is that right now we're in illusion, so we see the world as flat. When we go up, when we advance spiritually, when we get knowledge and we get free from illusion, right, we will be liberated from that wrong understanding, and we will understand that everything is one. So we'll understand the problem. So that's what we call Vyavaharika level and Paramartika level. So you may hear Advaitins, you may hear people of all sorts of philosophical schools talk about love, talk about grace, talk about the relationship between man and God. But ultimately, if they're Advaitins, if they're non-dualists, it's meaningless ultimately, because they ultimately believe in the Paramartic idea that everything is all one. So their grace is really a false grace. Their God love is really a false love because it doesn't exist, because there is no reality to the two entities that they talk about. They only believe in one, ultimately. So the ideas of grace and God and the doctrine of devotion, enumerated in the Vedas and developed in the Upanishads and the Gita, blossomed forth fully in Ramanuja. So Ramanuja was the first Acharya, right? Or not the first, because he came in a line of these other Acharyas that he quote, but he was the first to systematically and strongly put forward the idea of a theistic form of Vedanta. So it's a theistic form of Vedanta, which actually accepts a personal God. The God of Ramanuja is not just a personal God; he's also an impersonal God. He has all sorts of aspects to him. We say Sriman Narayana has Ananta Kalyana Gunas. He has unlimited auspicious qualities, and therefore he has many aspects to him. So he has an impersonal aspect also, but the personal aspect is also a reality. So there are these two basic forms of philosophy in Sanskrit, which are called Parinamavad and Vaivartavad. So Vaivartavad is Shankaracharya says that we see diversity in this world, but it's an illusion. It's not a real thing. It's an illusion. And Ramanuja says Parinamavad. He follows Parinamavad. Most of the other acharyas also follow this idea of Parinamavad. That there is a real transformation of Brahman. In other words, yes, God created everything. Everything is created out of him, the universe, the souls, etc. He was the original, but he's a source of all sources. He's the cause of all causes. But he also the transformations of God into the souls, into the world, is a real transformation and not a false transformation. Shankara says it's a false transformation, and when you attain knowledge, you see that it's not a transformation at all. Everything's just one. Ramanuja says, no, it's a real transformation. These are real things. The three reals, the Chit, Achit, and Ishvara, are real, and they're different, and they're really different. And this is the book that's going to tell you about these three real substances, right? I guess if Shankara was to write a book, he might write a book, Tattva Ekam. Instead of Tattva Trayam, he would write Tattva Ekam, that there's only one principle, Brahman, the Supreme Spirit. So continuing on, from the material available to us, it seems that Yamuna, who are we talking about here? Yamunacharya is like the grand guru, the Paramacharya, the Paramaguru, or the teacher of Ramanuja. And in fact, Ramanuja wanted to approach Yamuna after leaving the school of Yadava Prakash, which we talked about. Yadava Prakash was a Beta Baden, following in the footsteps, but slightly different to Bhaskara. So when Ramanuja left that school, because he disagreed with that philosophy, he wanted to approach Yamunacharya, who was also in this lineage coming from these other great saints of Bodhayana, Tanka, Dramita, Karpadian, Baruchi, all these different people. And he therefore wanted to approach him, but by the time he actually went to approach him, he unfortunately just passed away, previous to Ramanuja formally accepting him as a guru. So he accepted him as a teacher in spirit. He wanted to do what Yamuna wanted him to do. And he took initiation, he took actual formal initiation or Samashrayanam Prapati Panchasamskara from one of the disciples of Yamunacharya. He also had other disciples of Yamunacharya who taught him different subjects as well. Okay. So Yamuna, when we say Yamuna, we mean Yamunacharya, or he's also called in Tamil Alavanda. Okay, so from the material available to us, it seems that Yamuna, or Alavanda, was the first thinker of the Vishishtadvaita school. And of course, when they say first teacher, it doesn't mean that there were not teachers before, but we don't have material from the teachers that came before. The first time that we have material, or we have books extant today, is from Yamuna. So we have Yamuna's books. We have Vidarta Sangraha, we have Siddhi Trayam, we have Chatusloki, we have Stotra Ratna, which we're studying right now with Dr. Tiran Ryan. So anybody wants to attend that class, we can come and see that. And we also have 3 books on these tattvas, which are given by which are called Siddhi Traya, right, or the three cities, which are Ishvara Siddhi, Samvat Siddhi, and Chit Siddhi, I think, and Ishvara Siddhi and Samvat Siddhi. I don't know. Anyway, so we have these books by Yamuna. So Yamuna was the first thinker of Vishishtadvaita school who sought to controvert the Advaitic view by a dialectical method, right? So systematically, Yamuna, systematically tried to argue against Shankara's philosophy. In his Siddhi Traya, okay, so now we're talking about Siddhi Traya. In his Siddhi Traya, which is devoted to a comparative and critical discussion of the individual self and the supreme self from different standpoints, right? So these are two of the three things that we're talking about here: the individual self, the Atman, and the supreme self, which is called the Paramatman, right? Sometimes also called the super soul or God. The soul, the super soul, and God. Okay, so here we have supreme self from different standpoints. He subjects to a critical examination the Advaitic theory of the self as pure consciousness, right? As set forth in the Ishta Siddhi of Vimuktatman. So Vimuktatman is another Advaitic writer, right? And he wrote a book called Ishta Siddhi, right? And therefore, Yamunacharya wrote a book against the ideas of this Ishta Siddhi, and he called his book Siddhi Traya. So the person has called Ishta Siddhi, right? And he's written Siddhi Traya against it. Okay. So he has reputed other Advaitic doctrines like unity of consciousness, illusoriness of the universe, the concept of avidya. Vidya means knowledge. Avidya means ignorance or illusion, and the like. So Yamunacharya has repudiated all these doctrines of Advaita, all these doctrines of non-dualism. What are those doctrines? Unity of consciousness, that consciousness is one. Doesn't make any sense in reality because, for instance, I have consciousness of my body. If my body feels pain, do you feel it? You don't feel it, right? Why don't you feel? If your consciousness and my consciousness if it's all just one big consciousness, right? Then why don't I feel your pain and you feel my pain? We don't. So because practical experience tells us that this philosophy of Shankara's is wrong. What Shankara says is the reason you don't feel the pain of the other person is because the pain doesn't exist and you don't exist and the other person doesn't exist and you're all just one big consciousness. But we have no practical experience of Shankara's ideas, right? In other words, it's nice. It may be nice philosophy. It may be philosophically interesting or logical to some people, but it's not practical. We don't have a practical experience of these things, right? So he's also repudiated these doctrines like unity of consciousness, illusoriness of the universe. Shankara's motto, one of the mottos of the Advaitins is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Brahma Satyam means Brahman, or spirit, is truth. Spirit is truth. The one spirit is truth. Jagat, this world, this universe, Mithya. This world is an illusion. So if this world is an illusion, then how can we act? How can we even live in a world if we understand it's an illusion? If the whole thing is illusion. If the self is an illusion, the universe is an illusion, God is an illusion, and it's all just one homogeneous spirit, right? It doesn't sound like there's any possibility. This is very impractical philosophy, right? People may like it from term. In some people may like it, but it's not. It's completely impractical. So the illusoriness of the universe is another thing. The other Vaishnava philosophers never say the universe is illusory. They say this universe is real. It has reality. Yes, it changes. It's material, and material things can change, right? We see trees grow, right? They grow up and they die. We see human beings are born, they die, they go through different changes through their lifetime. So we see things, but it's really the body that dies. It's the body of the tree that dies. There's an eternal spirit, of course, the Atman within each thing, each living thing. But there are some things which change. The philosophical viewpoint of Shankara is that nothing should change. Everything is spiritual, and therefore everything must be changeless in reality. And that if we see any change, that change is actually an illusion because of our ignorance. But somehow or other, that ignorance itself is part of the spirit as well. It's not different also from the spirit. It's a very strange philosophy, and it's very easy to defeat for Vaishnavas and for most of these schools of Vedanta. They don't accept Advaita. As I said in the beginning, Advaita, Shankara's philosophy, is on one side, one extreme monism, extreme singularity, extreme non-dualism. And on the other side, we have Madhva. On the other side, extreme difference. We won't go into it right now. And in between, we have all these other philosophers who give slight differences, but basically you can think of Ramanuja as being in the middle between the difference and non-difference. He accepts some differences and accepts some non-differences. Okay, so the concept of avidya. The concept of avidya is very strange. Shankara goes to very great lengths to try to prove that ignorance or illusion is real. Well, if illusion is real, then it must be something separate from Brahman, the supreme spirit, right? If we say there's only one thing, there's a supreme spirit, then why do we see difference here in this world? Well, Shankara says we see difference because of illusion. Well, then illusion must be real. Not the illusions it's themselves, but the fact that there is an illusion is real, right? Just like we say, the things we see in a dream or in a desert, if we see a mirage, the things that we see in the mirage are not real. The things that we see in a dream are not real, but the dream itself is real. The mirage itself is real, right? Even though the things in it are not real. So the dream is real. So that would mean the dream is real. If the dream is real, there's a reality to ignorance, right? If you say that you're only seeing all these things because of ignorance, then ignorance is a real thing, which is affecting you. But Shankara says, no, ignorance is not a real thing, right? Ignorance is not a real thing. Actually, what they say is ignorance is neither real nor unreal, which is really word jugglery or speculation. And so then when you ask, okay, so how can a thing be both real and unreal, right? It sort of sounds like modern physics, Schrodinger's cat or some particles and waves and how they're real and non-real. But anyway, so we have Shankara saying, the Advaitins saying, ignorance or avidya is neither real nor unreal. Okay, so try answering that on a yes or no question. Is it real or not real? No. Third check the third box. It is neither real nor unreal, according to Shankara. So if something is neither real or unreal, can we conceive of such a thing? No, we cannot conceive of such a thing. In fact, this is something which we don't accept. We can't accept this idea that something can be both real and unreal, or neither real and unreal, or unreal. It's a very strange idea, but this is Shankara's idea. When you put this point to Shankarites, to Advaitins, when you say, okay, so you say everything we see is different, it's different is because of ignorance, and okay, so is ignorance real then? And they say ignorance is neither real nor unreal. What does that mean? That is gobbledygook, right? That's a craziness, okay, right? When you ask them to actually explain their philosophy of that ignorance is neither real nor unreal, they say anivachaniya. This is a term in Sanskrit which the Shankarites use when they get their back up against the wall, when they paint themselves into a corner. When they have a problem in philosophy, they say anivachaniya. And the word anivachaniya means it cannot be described by words. In other words, I can't tell you, I can't explain it to you because it's beyond words. Okay, so once again, when we talk to the Advaitin says that we see difference because of avidya or ignorance, and ignorance, then the question comes, is ignorance real or not real? And then he says that ignorance is both neither real nor unreal, it's both real and unreal, like that. And so we say that is craziness, that's gobbledygook. Can you explain that? And he says, anivachaniya, it cannot be described by words. And this is the ultimate philosophical concept. Cop-out. When you get a person to that point in this philosophical argument, you just say, forget it, walk away, because they have painted themselves into a philosophical corner. They have reached the limit of their philosophy, because if they cannot explain to you, and how do they explain philosophy? They explain it using words. And if they cannot explain to you the concept by words, then basically their philosophy fails. It fails. At least theoretically, we should be able to, even if we can't, even if there might be an experience they say, of course, obviously, we experiencing reality, experiencing a higher truth or something like that will come with an epiphany or a realization. But at the same time, at least theoretically, we should be able to understand a philosophy. If we cannot even theoretically understand a philosophy from a theoretical point of view, then it's useless. Forget about it. Okay, so he also repudiates the Advaitic doctrines like unity of consciousness, illusory of universe, and the concept of vidya, which we just covered. So Yamuna started to do this. He started to use logic and reference to scriptures and things to defeat these wrong ideas of Shankara. After Yamuna, Ramanuja carried forward this task with great fervor as Mayavada had become more pronounced during his time. So when they say Mayavada, Vada means to speak, right? So people they speak their different philosophies, right? So the persons who speak about Maya means it's made up of two words. Ma means not in Sanskrit. Ya means that. So people who talk about that which is not. That which is not is illusion or ignorance. That which is not is illusion, right? An illusion is something which isn't real. It's not that which is not. So it's called Maya, illusion. So Maya Vada is a person who talks about illusion. It's another way of saying an Advaitin, a follower of Adi Shankaracharya's philosophy. So it became more pronounced at the time of Ramanuja, which was just after Yamuna. And therefore, Ramanuja also continued to hit the Advaitins with all these logical and scriptural arguments against their crazy philosophy ideas. Right. So the chief aim of Ramanuja is to controvert the doctrines of the Advaita school with the view of establishing the teachings of the Vishishtadvaita school on a sound logical and textual basis. His attack is directed mainly against the central doctrine of Advaita that Brahman, right, which means spirit, the great spirit, right, which is attributeless, pure consciousness, which is the definition given in some Upanishads, and the definition which Shankara latches onto, attributeless, pure consciousness. Now, the word attributeless in Sanskrit is nirguna. Guna means qualities. Nir means without qualities. The word nirguna is accepted by Vishishtadvaitins, by followers of Ramanuja, and by other Vaishnavas to mean without material qualities, without bad qualities, without wrong qualities. So Brahman, the supreme Brahman, or the Lord, the supreme person, God, is without material qualities. He's without wrong qualities, without bad qualities. He has unlimited auspicious qualities. But the Mayavadis, or the Advaitins, the followers of Adi Shankara, have misinterpreted this word in the scriptures to mean he's without any qualities. Can there be something without any qualities logically? Who knows logic? Can there actually be something without qualities? If I say there's something, I'm going to call it Brahman, the supreme spirit. It has no qualities. It has absolutely no qualities. Then somebody will say, well, logically, it has one quality. It has the quality of having no qualities. That's the quality that Brahman has. Shankara's Brahman has a quality. If you meet an Advaitin and he says, Brahman has no qualities, then I'll say, well, your Brahman has a quality. It has the quality of having no qualities. It is void of qualities. That it is the only thing that has no qualities. You say it has no qualities. So it's the only thing that has no qualities. So if I want to define it, I say it has the quality of having no qualities. That's logic. So then they say, oh, okay. They're defeated. Immediately defeated. There cannot be a thing with no qualities because the thing with no qualities has that quality of having no qualities. That's logic. So by logic, we can destroy this argument of the Advaitins, right? And so Ramanuja and Yamuna did that. They started to do that. The central doctrine of Advaita is that everything is one, attributeless, pure consciousness. How can there be something which has no qualities? devoid of all determinations, constitutes the sole reality and the manifoldness of the world, and everything other than Brahman is not real. Brahman alone is real, right? Whereas Buddha said nothing is real. Everything is unreal. Shankara came along and said, there is a real, there's one thing which is real. It has no qualities. Both of these are totally illogical, totally unprovable, totally unexperiential, right? Ideas, right? So we have to reject them. So, okay, constitute reality and manifold. Okay. So the doctrine of Maya or illusion, right, which is unique to the Advaita school, right, which is why the Advaitins are called Mayavadis. They speak all about Maya all the time. They talk about Maya. They talk about illusion, right? Suffers from the heavy brunt of his attack, right? So in Sribhashya, there's a thing called the Mahasiddhanta, which completely defeats on 7 points. Ramanuja completely defeats this idea of Shankaras, this central point of Shankaras that everything is Brahman and Brahman has no qualities. The first work written by Ramanuja, chronologically, we went through some of the works of Ramanuja. We didn't mention all 9 of them, but we talked about the ones on the Prasthana Trayi, right? We talked about the 3 commentaries on Vedanta Sutra, the commentary on the Upanishads, and the commentary on the Gita, right? Apart from that, he had a book of daily rituals called Nitya. He had 3 prose works called the Gadya Traya, which are Sharanagati Gadya, Sriranga Gadya, and Vaikuntha Gadya, right? Which we'll go into some other time, right? But here, we're talking about in chronological order. It's understood or it's thought that Ramanuja wrote this book first, Vedanta Sangraha, which was his commentary on the understanding the Upanishads, how to understand the Upanishads, not the Vedanta Sutras, not the Gita, the Upanishads, which is one of the 3 main texts, basic texts. So where he reinterprets the principal Upanishadic texts, which according to Advaita lend themselves to Advaitic or non-dualistic interpretation. He establishes the unsoundness of their alleged Advaitic leaning and expounds them in accordance with the teachings of Vishishta Advaita. Then he writes in his magnum opus, the Sribhashya, a commentary on the Brahma Sutras. After this, he composes 2 epitomes of the Sribhashya, the Vedanta Sara, a short and simple gloss, and the Vedanta Deepa, a work model of the same model, but fuller in discussion and more exhaustive in exposition. Okay, so what they're saying here is, okay, so the first thing is that Ramanuja writes his Vedanta Sangraha. In the Vedanta Sangraha, he looks at the way that Shankara has interpreted the words in the Upanishads to mean only non-dualism. And he explains how that's not correct. And in fact, we see that Shankara looks for non-dualistic terms or terms that he can interpret as non-dualistic in the Upanishads. All the other terms, the dualistic terms, he rejects. Madhva, on the other hand, on the other scale, on the other side of philosophy, in the dualistic side, he looks in the Upanishads and he sees dualistic terms or terms that he can interpret as dualistic, and he rejects all the monistic terms. Right? Whereas Ramanuja, those are called beta shrutis and abeta shrutis and abeta shrutis. The shrutis, or the text of the Vedas, which talk of difference, and the text of the Vedas that talk of oneness. So they're both emphasized by the different acharyas. Shankara emphasizes the text on oneness. Madhva emphasizes the text on dualism, because they have those schools, monism and dualism. Ramanuja, however, says we have to accept all the texts. We have to accept all the texts. There are texts which talk about monism. There are texts that talk about dualism. And there are also texts which can be interpreted either way. They talk about monism and dualism, which are termed as Gatika Shrutis. So we have Beta Shrutis, Abeta Shrutis, and Gatika Shrutis. We have these 3 types of texts in the Upanishad, and we have to take all of them, and we have to have a philosophy which accepts all of them. Not just accepting the oneness, not just accepting the difference, but accepting both and rationalizing how both can be understood in one philosophy, one holistic philosophy, Vishishta Advaita. So Ramanuja does that in his Vedanta Sangraha. Then he writes commentary on the sutras, which is his main commentary. His magnum opus is his greatest work is the Sribhashya. Then he writes a very simple version of it, called Vedanta Sara. Then he writes one which is a little bit more complicated, which gives some more discussion than the Vedanta Sara for the next step up people of students. And he writes this Vedanta Deepa. Vedanta Sara means the essence of Vedanta. Sri Bhashya means the big commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta Sara means the essence, and Vedanta Deepa means a light on Vedanta. So lastly, he writes a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And this is also where Shankara really falls down on his commentary on Bhagavad Gita. It's very difficult because Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna. Krishna is an avatar of the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana. So it's very difficult to expound on Bhagavad Gita without some sort of acknowledgement of the personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Brahmano hi pratisthanam, that Brahman, or spirit, right? I am the source of spirit. The spirit comes from me. I am the source of spiritual things, or impersonal spirit, right? So the other way around, Shankara's philosophy is the other way around, is that Krishna is a manifestation of Brahman. No, Krishna is not a manifestation of Brahman. Brahman's a manifestation of Krishna. Krishna says so himself in the Gita. So how does Shankaracharya come to interpret that? Where Krishna says, I am the source of Brahman. Brahmano hi pratisthanam. Pratisthanam. From me comes Brahman. How can Shankara explain that? Right? How can Shankara explain when Arjuna says, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam, Purusham Shashvatam Divyam, Aridevam Ajam Bhigum, Ahustvam Rishaya Sarve, Deva Rishi Naradastata. This is in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna says, you're the supreme to Krishna. You are the supreme. You're the supreme person. And not only do I say that, declare that now, but all these great sages, Devala, Narada, all these different sages have also said it throughout the Vedic literature. They've all said that you're the supreme, like that. So throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is understood to be the supreme person. So Shankara, in his commentary, ultimately, in his Gita commentary, he has to admit Narayana Parovyaktat is a statement that Shankara makes in his Gita commentary, that Narayana is above, is a supreme person. He has to accept that. People gloss over this, but very difficult for Shankara to interpret the Gita because it's such a personalist text. The Upanishads may be interpreted in an impersonal way, right? The Vedanta Sutras also, but the Gita is such a personalist text. How can he interpret that? Very difficult. So lastly, Ramanuja writes a commentary on the Gita, right, which is a work of great merit and results in a result of considerable thought. Apart from the above works, there are two other works. Well, they say two other works, but we can divide the Gadya-traya. That is, the Gadya-traya is actually three separate works, right? It's Trayam means three, as we know from Tattva here. So Gadya means a prose work. So there are three prose works of Ramanuja, and the Nitya Granthas, which are also ascribed to him. But the authenticity of this ascription is quite doubtful. Okay, so this here they're giving their opinion. These scholars are giving their opinion that these books are not, the Gadya-traya and the Nitya Grantha are not actually ascribed to Ramanuja. But I would disagree, right? There was another Lester. There's a person called Professor Lester who also had this idea that Ramanuja wrote these other books, but he didn't write the Gadya-traya and the Nityas. This is not accepted at all in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. It's accepted that he wrote these 9 books, right? Because these books deal with different subject matters than the other books, right? They deal with more practical aspects of the Lord's love and the Lord's grace and worshiping the Lord in his iconic form and doing particular practical rituals during the day. They think this has got nothing to do with Ramanuja because Ramanuja was just a philosopher. He's just all in his head like Shankara. No. Ramanuja was a practical person, and therefore these things are definitely part of Ramanuja's writings. They vary from his other work in style as well as in subject matter. The Nitya Grantha, which deals with the routine of the devotee, contains no philosophy. Of course, it's a ritual manual, right? The Gadya-traya, described as exercises in bhakti, seems to be an imitation of some later hand of Ramanuja's introduction to the Gita Bhasya. This is their idea. Their idea is that because it's written about grace and about love and about the actual relationship between God and the living beings and Mahalakshmi, that therefore it's not written by Ramanuja. We don't agree at all. The main contribution of Ramanuja lies in the clear and systematic presentation of the views of his Vishishtadvaitic precursors, previous teachers, right, to whom he expresses his indebtedness and in whom there is an attempt to synthesize the absolute of philosophy with the God of religion, right? It's a philosophy of religion, right? It's not a mundane, dry philosophy without God. It is a philosophy that includes theology also, that there is a God there. So, by emphasizing religious experiences without ignoring the critical requirements of philosophy, the chief sources of Ramanuja's philosophy are the Prasthana Traya, which we discussed before. He also makes an unsparing use of corroborative evidences from the epics, meaning the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, right? The Puranas, meaning mostly the Sattvika Puranas. There are 18 Mahapuranas, out of which 6 are considered to be more in the mode of goodness, 6 in the mode of passion, 6 in the mode of ignorance. So the Sattvika Puranas are considered to be great sources of knowledge also. The Dharma Shastras, which are the Shmitis, which we can talk about some other time. The Brahmanas and Aranyakas, which are also part of the Veda. Right. Some scholars allege that he has fabricated scriptural evidence. Okay, this always comes up, especially with Madhva and certain writers. There are some quotations which are given from scripture which are now no longer extant, and some acharyas do that. Okay, so some people have alleged that he fabricated scriptural evidence, that is to say, made room within Vedanta for a great many shrutis and shmitis that Shankara either ignored or relegated to the rank of relative truth. Okay, so those who pass such criticism take Shankara's selection, interpretation, and treatment of the scriptures as normative. Okay, so just because Shankara didn't mention something doesn't mean it didn't exist. Okay, maybe Shankara was unable or unwilling to interpret it, or it didn't fit his ideas. So, as normative, it is well to remember that in this connection that the school of Ramanuja professes to follow has a venerable ancestry, commencing even before the time of the author of the sutras. So it goes way back, right? Even before Shankara, his school. In the Upanishads, we find distinctly theistic and devotional tendencies gradually developing. Right, the Brahma Sutras furnish us with the indications of the evidence of the existence of essentially different Vedantic traditions. Here we find divergent doctrines of teachers like Atraya, Ashmaratya, Odalomi, Kashanjini, Kasha Krishna, Jaimini, Badari, etc., being quoted by Badarayana himself. Okay, we understand that the person who wrote this has studied extensively. There are other interpretations. They're just dropping names here to show that they've also studied more in Vedanta. An analysis of the sutras like 1, 4, 20, 22, 3, 4, 7, 14, 4, 4, 5, and 7, etc., where the views of these teachers are recorded and contrasted, clearly indicates that even before Badarayana composed the sutras, there were different views on the teachings of the Upanishads, and that the theistic view was one of them. Thank you very much for saying that the Upanishads were not originally anti-theistic. Right. In the Shankara Bhashya, also, we meet with indications pointing to an existence of divergent Vedantic traditions in 1.3.15, which is in the Brahma Sutras, having explained his position with regard to the ontological status of the individual self. Shankara writes, Aparetu vadinaha paramatikam eva jiva rupam iti manyante asmad iya kechit. Other thinkers, again, some of them belonging to us as well, regard the individual soul as ultimately real. There you go. Shankara himself says that there are other thinkers or previous teachers who believe that the soul is ultimately real. Shankara believes the soul is not ultimately real. It's ultimately only Brahman. it has no separate existence. The term Asmadiya refers to Vedantic. Asmadiya means of us, right? Asmadiya refers to Vedantic thinkers, and this clearly indicates that Shankara was willing to call them Vedantic. Yamuna, the author of Siddhi Trayam Gita Sangraha, which is his essence of the Gita, mentions a series of authors who precedes him and composes works explanatory of the sutras. They are also referred to by Ramanuja in his Sri Bhashya and Vedanta Sangraha, and the quotations of the writings of some of them are not infrequent in these works. Thus, it becomes quite evident that Ramanuja's interpretation of the sutras had authoritative representations within the Vedantic circle already at a period anterior before to that of Badarayana and Shankara. In post-Ramanuja Vishishta Dvaita, we find the emergence of two distinct camps, based mainly in the different interpretations of the nature of property meaning surrender to God as a method of attaining liberation, right? The Vadagalai of the northern school led by Vedanta Deshika or Venkatanatha as he's also known, and the Tengalai or the southern school led by Pillai Lokacharya, and later by Somya Jamatri Muni, which is another name for Manavalabha Munigal. The Tengalais regard the Tamil Prabandha as canonical and are the southern school and are indifferent to the Sanskrit tradition. That's not true, as I mentioned in the beginning. The Vadagalais accept the two as equally authoritative. Both Kalais, both schools, accept both the Sanskrit and the Tamil traditions as being authoritative. The Vadagalais emphasize human initiative and effort as essential prerequisite for receiving the grace of God. That is called Markata Nyaya, or the analogy of the monkey and the baby monkey holding on to the mother monkey while the mother monkey moves from tree to tree. The baby has to exert effort to hold on, right? And while the grace of God is only an alternative means to be resorted to only by those who find it difficult to follow the path of karma, jnana, and bhakti, right? That's not actually what Vadagalais believe. Okay, we can discuss that later. The Tengalais, on the other hand, regard property not as yoga or human endeavor, but as a work completely to be done by God only. That is the analogy of the cat and the mother cat and the baby kitten. That is called the Marjala Nyaya, or where the baby kitten does nothing, the mother comes and picks the kitten up in its mouth and takes it away to liberation. So God does everything for the Tengalais, right? It is God's irresistible and causes grace that causes moksha, and not, as the Vadagalais say, it is the effort of the individual, which is important. Sort of like the Christian, between the Protestant and Catholic churches in Christianity, the argument about faith and works, whether faith with works is important or faith alone is all important. They further hold that they further hold that it is the only means to attain salvation. So, whereas the Vadagalais believe that karma, jnana, and bhakti yogas can be a way. Also, for some people, property is also a way. The Tengalais say no, property is the only way. Okay, the characteristic difference between the two schools is indicated by their nicknames. The northern school is called the monkey school, Markata Nyaya, because it teaches that the soul must cooperate with the deity in attaining salvation. As a young monkey clings to its mother, who carries it to safety. The southern school is called the cat school, the Marjala Nyaya, because it teaches that the soul needs nothing for salvation beyond passively submitting to the deity, as the kitten remains passive while its mother carries it about in its mouth. Both of the schools try to read their respective views into the works of Ramanuja, but there is no basis for their doing so. That's their opinion, right? There is actually, if we look at Yamunacharya's Gita Sangraha, if we look at Ramanuja's works, there is definitely these ideas within those works. As Ramanuja has not at all taught about the doctrine of property, that's their idea. Okay, that this is the idea of some people. Okay, the epistemology of Ramanuja forms the basis of his metaphysics. He accepts three sources of knowledge, that is, perception or sense perception, inference or logic, and scriptural testimony. Perception and inference are competent to deal with empirical matters only, and it is scripture alone which has an absolute monopoly and ultimate say in transcendental or non-empirical matters. This does not mean he rejects argumentation and philosophy, but only assigns it a place subservient to scriptural authority. According to him, discrimination being a precondition, all knowledge is determinate and relational expressing the subject-object relationship. There can be no apprehension without characterization, and the nirvikalpa stage of perception is not an attributeless pure apprehension. So nirvikalpa idea of apprehension we can discuss some other time. It means apprehension without any qualities. So the difference between the nirvikalpa and savikalpa is not nirguna or saguna, we can say, is not that of kind, but that of degree, insofar as the latter is more determined than the former. Neither perception nor inference nor scriptures give us any knowledge which is indeterminate. Right. So there's no such thing as indeterminate knowledge. Right. Ramanuja maintains that bare identity is as non-existent as a hare's horn. A hare's horn. Rabbits don't have horns. Right. So every judgment is an affirmation of reality. Even a dream or even a mirage is a reality, is a real thing, right? It's a real dream. It's a real mirage. The things in it may be unreal, but it is real, right? And not mere apprehension of identity devoid of content. Though every judgment affirms identity, there is an equally important factor, that is difference. Thought qualifies reality and presupposes distinction between subject and object, right? If there's thinking and if there's feeling, if there's a sense perception, there has to be someone who is sensing, something that is sensed, and the action of sensing, right? So there has to be these three things, right? There can be no knowledge without the knower and the known. So there can be no knowledge, but there's no knower. And the knower is not distinct from the known, right? So this is the point, right? Between subject and object, which is integrally united and not isolated bits. Ramanuja further holds that no cognition is false or illusionary. He advocates Satyativada, we'll get into what that means sometime, maybe later, according to which all cognitions are true, which is what I said, that the mirage and the dream are also a true apprehension. That which is called illusory is only because it does not serve our practical purposes. So the water in the mirage, in the desert, doesn't serve our practical purposes, doesn't quench our thirst, and therefore that's an illusion. But the actual seeing of the water, that is a real. It's a real illusion. We actually have that sense perception like that, but it doesn't serve any practical purpose, right? So the epistemology in Ramanuja provides a basis to ontology. According to him, Brahman, the ultimate reality, is not attributeless pure thought, indeterminate or bare identity devoid of contents. Determination for him is non-negation, nor is predication a perversion. That's an interesting statement. They in fact enrich the reality. He firmly maintains that there can be no unity without differentiation, right? And there can be no differentiation without a type of unity, right? Unity. Qualities, that's why it's called Vishishtadvaita, holistic unities. Qualities do not hang in vacuo, right? But in a substance. Right. So you can't have just qualities by themselves. They have to inhere in a substance. There's no, I can't say that there's a white, there's just white. You have to say there's a white cow or a white room or a white house or a white chair, right? So there has to be something, the attributes and the qualities have to go together. In the ultimate reality, therefore, we have determinations, limitations, and differences which are in it but not of it. They are not left unorganized, but are coordinated, since they are contained and accommodated in one unifying principle. These contents, which are accommodated in it, are all real, permanent, inseparable, and substantial modes, technically known as prakaras. Okay, so these prakara means modes, and the ultimate reality is known as prakarin. Okay, so which is the prakarin has prakaras, right? Or modes. The reality has different modes. Okay, so the relation between the two is known as apratik siddha, or that of internal and inseparable relation. According to this theory, all animate beings, chit, and inanimate beings, achit, right, are inseparable modes or bodies of God, who is their soul and is therefore, and this is therefore called chit achit, vishishteshvara. So Ishvara, or God, is known by his modes of chit and achit. God is known by the world and the souls, which are his body. All entities of the world are directed and sustained by him and exist internally for him. All things are eventually his forms, and all names ultimately refer to him. Right. Because everything refers to him, right? Because everything is coming from him, right? Accordingly, every word becomes a symbol of God, and no word ceases to signify after expressing its usual meaning, but extends its significance until it reaches the supreme, which is what I taught you about Agni being fire, the demigod of fire, but ultimately meaning the name of the Lord and meaning the supreme Godhead, who is powerful like fire. In fact, it is only the latter that which is this essential significance of the word. So that's the main meaning. Thus, God is one all-embracing absolute reality endowed with all imaginable, auspicious, and excellent attributes, infinite in number to the highest degree, which are unsurpassable. He is of the nature of consciousness and bliss, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-comprehending, kind and compassionate, and the inner ruler of all things and beings. He is defined as the real of reals. He is the one that pervades the many, but does not pass over into the many. He is the absolute that includes souls and matter, and yet exceeds their contents and value. The finite is rooted in the infinite, is sustained by his will, and serves his redemptive end. He is the metaphysical, ethical, religious, and aesthetic highest, and still further, he is the inner soul, the life of all things and beings. The cosmology in Ramanuja's philosophy follows from the ontological view of Brahman as the soul of all things and beings by a suitable application of Satkaryavad and Brahma Shakti Parinamavad, which we'll explain later. Brahman, one without a second, undifferentiated in the beginning, gets differentiated into the world of names and forms by the process of self-manifestation. Brahman exists in two distinct stages: the pre-creational Karanavasta, when all multiplicity is in him in a dormant form, and the creational or Karyavasta, when the multiplicity gets explicit. The pre-creational stage is a real possibility in which the souls and matter are pre-existent in a subtle but indistinguishable way. In creation, the potential becomes actual. In both the stages, Brahman exists as matter and souls, with matter and souls as his modes. The three are distinguishable but non-divisible, eternal but not external. Brahman enters into the world as the immanent cause, but remains uncontaminated by the world process, and hence is transcendental as well. The process of nature is in the interest of the progress of the soul, and both serve the inner purpose of Brahman, or the Supreme. The entire cosmos is not a figment of nescience or ignorance, right, but a living temple of God and the outcome of his leela, or his sport, which comes about by his desire. The nature of Brahman in Ramanuja's philosophy determines the nature and destiny of the individual self. He accepts a plurality of unborn, eternal, and immutable selves, which are unique entities having knowledge as their essential attribute. The individual self is atomic, but its consciousness is infinite and all-pervasive in liberation, of course, not now when we're covered by ignorance, though circumscribed by karma in the embodied state, right? So we're covered by that karma and that ignorance. It is at once a substance and an attribute having monadic uniqueness of Leibniz and the modal dependence of Spinoza. right? If you know those philosophers, right? Brahman is the substance that exists in himself, by himself, and for himself. The individual self, as a mode of Brahman, derives its form and function from Brahman and is dependent upon Brahman, though is distinct from him. The modes are many, but the substance is one. They differ in denotation, but unite in connotation. That is, their unity is not in terms of existence, but in terms of experience. From denotive point of view, the individual self has its unique monadic being, but connotatively, it refers to Brahman as its ultimate meaning. Thus, Ramanuja upholds qualitative monism and quantitative pluralism. So in quality, we are one with the Supreme. In quantity, we are separate, we are distinct, like that. Even in quality, there are some qualities which the individual soul doesn't possess, but all bliss and all knowledge is not. We are essentially equal to the Supreme in liberation. This is Ramanuja's point. The individual self, according to Ramanuja, is formless but never characterless. It is essentially of jnata, karta, and bhokta, means the knower, the doer, and the enjoyer. An empirical state alone, it becomes shrouded in the body, composed of material elements. We are in this body, and subject to suffering. Its body becomes subject to decomposition and death. In all these changes of bodies through births and deaths, however, repeatedly the material frame is destroyed, and the inner unity of the self preserves its being. Right, the soul continues on. The self, being embodied due to ignorance, gets entangled in the cycle of metempsychosis, experiencing sorrows and suffering in accordance with the actions and proneness to ignorance, but ultimately through right action, right knowledge, and right devotion to God, resulting in an inflow of divine redemptive grace, it gets itself released, liberation. Then it possesses, restoring its pristine purity, all sublime attributes of God, not all attributes of God, but some attributes, and enjoys all his glories. Liberation, thus, is not a direct apprehension of Brahman or the Supreme, right, but a spiritual pilgrimage to him. It is not effectual by mere volition or abstract speculation, but only by a proper endeavor through a triadic course of sadhana by karma, jnana, and bhakti. Okay, so this is the idea given in Bhagavad Gita, also karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga. We've heard these before. In alternation to this triple path, the followers of Ramanuja prescribe another path, that is property or self-surrender, for those who find the former paths difficulty, right? Difficult. The core of the property margo, the property path, the path of surrender, is contained in the famous Gita passage, 1866, Sarvadharmam paritaja mamekam sharanam vraja amta sarvapapebhyo mokshesha vimasuchaha. The seeker of emancipation has to seek the grace of God, and the only requirement for this is a change of heart, a sense of utter humiliation, and humility, right? They mean not humiliation exactly. Humility is what they're trying to say, and an absolute surrender. And it is not a possession of any merit or wisdom by a feeling of unworthiness apart from God. It is an unconditional flinging to the grace of God. The fundamental tenet of this doctrine is make every action, every feeling, every thought as an offering to God. For sacrifice alone is the law of spiritual progress, as also stated in the Gita. Yat karosi yasnasi, yat jahosi dadasi, yat tapasi se konteya. Tat kurushva madarpanam. Offer everything to me, do everything for me. Right? Make everything an offering unto me. The devotee then perceives only God, thinks only of him, and talks only about him. He reaches his end, becomes self-satisfied, being composed in all-embracing, beneficent love of God, and revels in the rapport of divine bliss and glory. The culminating point in Ramanuja's philosophy is reached when we come to consider the nature of release itself, right? Of liberation, which for him is not quiet absorption or disappearance or even identity with Brahman. The highest satisfaction of religious feeling no doubt demands self-purification and self-surrender, but never complete self-annihilation or effacement. However higher a self may rise, right? It will always have an unobliterated, an inalienable individuality, and also an almighty power to revere and worship and adore the Supreme Person, right? Release is only a state of partial assimilation, a state of retaining individuality, but eradicating the sense of self-separateness. It is the elevation of the self to godlike existence, a transcendence from human to divine, but in the same time, worship of God, active service to the Lord. This is, in a nutshell, is the sum and substance of Ramanuja's teaching summarized in Tattva Trayam by Lokacharya, Pillai Lokacharya. The fundamental importance of this book lies in presenting the doctrines and teachings of Ramanuja in a simple and lucid style, giving them a Tengalai version, right? The tinge of the Southern School Acharya's interpretations. In this respect, it can fairly be compared with another work called Yatindra Madhadipika of Srinivasa, who apparently was a Vadagalai, which we've also studied. We've already studied, and we found that pretty tough going. So hopefully this is going to be a little bit easier, which expounds the same doctrines from a Vadagalai angle. And the author of this introduction leaves it there, S.R. Butt. So we've gone, I just wanted to finish that today. That is the introduction to Tattva Trayam. Next week we will start the actual book itself. Sorry to put you through that. That's a summary of the whole book, basically. Okay, and so we'll go through these different parts of it in more detail as we go through the book. But again, if we look at Yatindra Madhadipika and Tattva Trayam, they are about similar things, but one is more from the Vadagalai or Northern School side, and one is more from the Tengalai or the Southern School side. And so we'll understand a little bit of the different approaches, because we've already been through as a Purva Paksha, let's say. Purva Paksha means the initial argument, and now we're going to get the Siddhanta, or the final argument on this particular subject about the three principles of existence: Chit, Achit, Ishvara, the soul, the conscious beings, the sentient beings, the insentient things, right, of the universe, matter, right, and God, otherwise known as Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara, or God, like that. So does anybody have any questions or comments about that? I know it's probably getting late for all of you. So if you have any questions or comments about that whole thing, please watch the video again if you want to go over that. We went through it very quickly. Sorry about that. And there are many points which needed even further elucidation. And obviously we could have gone slower and explained things, but it will come again in the text. As we go through the text, we will cover all these points again. So any questions or comments at this point?
Swami, as you were saying that the Sri Vaishnava version of God is that he has an impersonal side and he has a personal side. And you were describing some time ago that he's Nirguna. And Nirguna, from a Sri Vaishnava point of view, it simply means he doesn't have any bad qualities. Where some say that Nirguna also means that he doesn't have any material qualities, he only has spiritual qualities. And they use that to justify that he isn't formless at all. But from the Sri Vaishnava point of view, it seems that he does have a formless being, as well as we know him as having form as a person, as Sriman Narayana. But how do we see both existing at the same time? How do we try to put that into perspective, with our limited brains? How do we do that?
You're not going to you can't, of course, I'm not going to say like the Mayavadis or the Advaitins, it cannot be understood by words. I'm not going to say Anivachaniya. I'm going to say we can try to describe the glories of God, right? We can try to describe the aspects of God. We can't fully describe them, right? But we give different analogies, like the body and the soul, the sharira shariri bhava, to understand God, to understand his nature. This philosophical problem is there in all schools of philosophy, even in the West. The Western philosophers have dealt with this topic. This topic is the distinction between the transcendence and immanence of God. God is immanent in this world because he's immanent. Okay, I'll give you an example. In India, they make little pots out of clay. They used to make little pots, little once-use cups out of clay. So the potter will make these pots. He's making it out of clay, right? So there's a substance clay, and he makes the pot. The pot is non-different from the clay, but the potter shapes the pot, and the pot, therefore, is a pot, not a lump of clay, like that. So this is Satkaryabad, or there's a true distinction between the clay and the pot, right? The clay is the previous form, the pot is the post form, like that. The pot serves a purpose, the clay doesn't serve any purpose, just sitting there as a lump. The potter makes it into the clay. In terms of Ramanuja's philosophy, right? Shankara says the clay and the pot are the same. He says the clay and the pot are the same. He says even the potter is the same as the clay and the pot. So this is an absurd philosophy, right? We say the clay and the pot are different, right? The potter is also different, right? But yet the clay and the pot are made out of the potter. That in terms of this world, of this universe, right? God is not only the substance, but he's also the attribute. The attribute, the thing which or the guna or the mode, the prakara comes out of the prakaran. There is God, and God is the source of everything. So if God is the source of everything, as a definition, God is the source of everything. He's the source of the souls and the source of the world. He's the source of all attributes. Attributes are also a thing which have a source. So he's the source, right? God, there's a real transformation of God into the souls, into the world. The souls and the world are real things, and they're not illusions because of some wrong idea that there's something which is illusion, which is illusioning God and making him into the souls and the world, which is what Shankara says. Okay. So in Western philosophy, they talk about transcendence and immanence. Many people believe in God, and they believe of God. When you talk to people about believing in God, they say, okay, God's a person. He lives up in the clouds in some heaven, and he's far away from the earth. And what happens here, he doesn't get involved anymore. Maybe in the ancient Israelites' time, he appeared as a burning bush, or he appeared as a disembodied voice or something like that, or he did something, he sent a plague of locusts into Egypt, or whatever he did, like that. Maybe he did stuff. Oh, he created the world in 7 days or whatever it is. But now he's retired. Now he just relaxes in heaven, and maybe puts his hand out and tries to touch Adam's hand or something like that on the Sistine Chapel. But he's an old guy. He sits up there in heaven, and he doesn't have much to do with what goes on earth anymore. He is completely transcendent. He's transcendental. He is transcendental. He's not material in any way. So therefore, he doesn't have anything to do with the material world. This is called deism in Western philosophy. So you have religions like Judaism, which is basically a deistic religion, where they say, yeah, God was involved in the world now, but he's not involved in the world now. He was previously involved in some ways, but now he's not really involved. It just all goes, he set the ball rolling, and now it's just going by itself. Right? But
right.
that doesn't explain everything. God is also immanent. God is also here. He's transcendent, but he's also immanent. He's outside of everything, pervading from the outside, but he's also pervading from the inside. He's immanent. So the immanence, people who talk about the immanence of God is with you every day. When you pray to God, he's always with you. You'll hear people say that. At the same time, they say he's there. He's off in some place, like that. So Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta explains how God is both immanent and transcendent. He's immanent and transcendent at the same time. The problem with immanence, I just described the problem with transcendence. The problem with transcendence is he's far away. The problem with immanence is that if he's involved in this world, if he's in this world, doesn't he become bound up in the faults in this world? If he's with me in my heart, does he not feel the pains and pleasures that I go through? If he's here in this material world, isn't he affected by that? No, he's not. It's like oil and water. They're next to each other, but they don't mix. Spirit and matter, like that. So I don't know if this is exactly answering completely your question, but the point is that there has to be immanent. God is immanent, and He's also transcendent. There has to be a philosophy which satisfies both those things, and that is Vishishtadvaita. Vishishtadvaita is a universal philosophy, which at once that's what all in God, everything in God, and God in everything, right? Panentheism, right, is what we call it in English, but in terms of Ramanuja, it's holistic, dual and non-dualism. So there's dualism in some ways, in some aspects, and there's non-dualism in other aspects like that. So we have to see. We can't really, you'll see as we go through, as we did with Yadinda Metadipika, there's an explanation of how things are similar and how things are different between these three principles, three principal realities. These are three reals. The souls are real. The universe is real. God is real. These three things are real. The first thing we come to, the first knowledge we come to is the soul is real. We know we're real. Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, right? So we know that we're real, right? If there's anything that a sane person knows, that he knows that he's real, right? Maybe an insane person thinks that he's not real, right? In that way, we can call the Advaitins crazy because they don't believe in the reality of the self. The Buddhists also don't believe in the reality of the self. You can go to so many Buddhist, lectures and things like that. They talk about reincarnation. You put your hand up and say, "What's reincarnating? What is it that's reincarnating?" If you don't believe in self, what is reincarnating? Buddhists believe in reincarnation. Most of them. Some of them don't. But how can you believe in reincarnation if you don't believe in the self, the reality of the self? What is reincarnating? So there are some really illogical philosophies out there, and people just accept them. My parents or my country has followed Buddhism. I follow it. Nobody goes deeply into an understanding of these different philosophies, trying to understand them. So here in India, that was what was said also, that in India, they tend to dissect everything down to the minutest detail like that. There's no such dissection or philosophical detail to this degree, right? In other religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, lightweight philosophy stuff, in my opinion, right? We can discuss if people think that that's a wrong observation, we can explain it. But anyhow, so the point is that we have to at once understand the transcendence and the immanence of God, and therefore we need a philosophy that explains that. And Vedanta explains that, but you have to understand the proper understanding of Vedanta, like that. So Ramanuja, on the basis of the Guru Parampara that's come before him, the many rishis who commentators that have done it, he presented it in a very logical, systematic way. And because he was so logical and systematic about the way he presented it, it eclipsed all of the previous teachers. And so we don't have a lot of the things from before like that. Although we know, he is quoted from some people. And then coming down, this split between the Vatagalites and Tengalis on certain subjects there's no split on Vishishtadvaita. Everybody agrees on Vishishtadvaita. Everybody agrees on these basic understanding of the three realities. You'll see, Yadinda Metadipika and this are very similar. So basically what you're saying is, if you, in Sri Bhashya, there are four adhyayas, 4 chapters in the Vedanta Sutras. The first one deals with what is Brahman, what is spiritual. Then the second one deals with what is not spiritual. Third one deals with the how to attain, or the first 2 are Tattva. Second one, Tattva means the reality. And the third one is Hita, or the process of liberation. And the fourth one is the goal, Purushartha, right? The goal, which is liberation, right? So this Tattvatraya is about it's like an equivalent of the first 2 chapters of the Brahma Sutras of Sri Bhashya, but it's put in a very simple way. Similarly, the same thing with Yadinda Metadipika. So that's what we're doing here. If you think that you wanted to study Sri Bhashya or even Vedanta Sara or Vedanta Deepa, first of all, understand a simple book like Tattvatraya or Yadinda Metadipika. We had trouble with Yadinda Metadipika even. It's a little bit difficult. Here, hopefully it'll be a very simple exposition. And once we understand the basics of Vishishta, I think pretty much we understand the basics of Vishishta Vedanta. We can go into more elaborate discussions about property and about surrender and everything like that, which is all built. Philosophical things are built one on top of the other concepts, so we have to start out with axiomatic truths. If we don't start with the right axioms, we don't end up with the proper building. If you don't have a good foundation, a good basis, you don't get a proper building, it falls down. Right, so that's the problem with Advaita and some of these other philosophies, because they're basic axioms. What's the axiom of the Buddhists? Nothing exists. Well, that's stupid, right? What's the basic axiom of the Advaitans? That everything is one homogeneous, qualityless, attributeless spiritual thing. That also very shaky foundation to build a philosophy on like that. Our philosophy is a philosophy of reality, right? We see around us reality. Even a baby, even a child knows that there's a real thing out, there's a real world out there like that. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to try and psych ourselves into thinking that nothing exists, or that only we exist and the universe doesn't exist, right? The Buddhists are trying to meditate. They're trying to meditate that nothing exists. The Advaitins are trying to think that only the self exists and the self is everything. It's not practical at all. It may be interesting to dabble in such philosophies, but it's not practical at all. And it doesn't even finish the test of the logic or proper interpretation of scripture, as we'll see, like that. So, okay, I'm very confident in Vishishtadvaita, and somebody might be thinking, well, okay, let's hear him out. But there are these other philosophical schools here. We can talk about them, and we can discuss their. He's going to get into what some of these other schools believe. You probably won't believe some of the things that they believe, right? And we'll look and we'll see. Is there any idea? Is there any truth to what they believe? So, for instance, Shankara has some truths to give us like that, but it is half truth. It is not the full truth, and therefore it is problematic, right? When we go to court, we're supposed to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, right? The truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. That's what we have to tell in court, and that is what Vishishtadvaita attempts to do, not telling us a half truth. Right? Yes, we're spiritual. Are we the same as God? No, we're not the same as God. There are these differences. Yes, the world is spiritual in one sense. In another sense, the world is not spiritual, like that. So there are differences, and there are subtle. It's not black and white. There are many shades of gray, and therefore we have to explain the different colors and the shades of gray, right? Rather than saying everything's black and white. It's either this or it's that. No. We have to understand from the scriptures when we can't understand by logic or by sense perception, empirical things. And therefore, this is an attempt to do that in a very simple way by Pilalokacharya. He starts off his 18 books of esoteric knowledge with this one. So this is like the beginning. We've already been studying the more interesting ones like the Mukshapadi and these other books, even Arthapanchika was more, this is going to be very basic, right? It's going to be like the Dinamata. So, you chose it, and you guys wanted to study this. If it gets boring, we'll just stop like that. Okay, if you say, "Well, I know all this already," that's fine. Let's go on to something else. That's up to you. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but the answer will be forthcoming through the book. About the nature of God and the nature of the souls and the relationship between them.